Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the council study session of October 22nd. And we have a full agenda this evening. There are 3 items. First, I'm going to go through, tell what all they are first. The first is ID 0578, Transit-Oriented Development Project. We have 30 minutes allocated for that. This will be an update. There are some changes for us to consider and some policy questions for us. The administration is looking for some guidance from the council on that matter. After that is ID 0554, the 2020 legislative agenda. We have 45 minutes allocated for that. And then finally, we're going to end up with a bang, ID 0574, the utility rates and water system plan. That's multi-layered. We've been addressing that. It has a lot of impact on their budget as well. So very timely topic for tonight. So we're going to start off, of course, with the TOD project, as we call it. Over to you, over to staff. Who's starting? Jen.
Great, yes, thank you, Councilmember Winterstein. And thank you for having us here tonight to talk about the TOD and to get some guidance on our next steps. So as you know, my name is Jen Davis-Hayes and I work in the Permit Center right now at the city and have been working on this project, the TOD project, for multiple years. So we'll go through a few slides in the beginning to just refresh your memory, and then really we're here to talk about 2 options tonight. So as mentioned, we've been working on this multiple years. We've been to council about 20 times. We were last here in June of this year to talk about the status of King County Housing Authority pursuing working with CenturyLink to get a purchase and sale agreement done on the site to move forward. Tonight, we wanted to give you an update on what's happened since then and talk about some options and solicit some feedback before we proceed or choose not to proceed. So. And again, we'll talk more about the specific things. I'm going to go through both options, but please feel free to stop me if you have any questions about either of them, and then we can go through a robust. We are presenting 2 options tonight, and they are 2 different tracks, but we want to make sure that we can move forward in a timely manner on either of them, depending on the decision and discussion tonight. So as many remember, the TOD project, which is here next to the Issaquah Transit Center, plans to have about 355 residential units with 175 or more of affordable housing. In the commercial space, we have about 10,000 square feet for the Opportunity Center, which we will have a dental, medical, and behavioral health center in that. And we're working with Health Point and Valley cities to provide those services based on our community needs assessment process. And again, just a quick overview of the finances. This is a large project, $165 million, and a lot of that money is coming from federal and other equity investments, but we do have a sizable local investment, and so here's a list of the local investments. Again, looking, some of those are been acquired from the county, the state, and the city, and Arch. So as you may remember, the way that we were able to build, we'll move forward on building at the project site on the picture on the left, is to actually relocate CenturyLink. The city purchased some property over there by the city shops and was proceeding with CenturyLink to develop this, or to design the site for them to relocate. We had an MOU that was signed in August 2017 and again extended in 2018 to continue this work. And until recently, we struggled with communications with CenturyLink about getting timely response, and things really started moving forward. At the end of August of this year, we had a site visit with about a dozen CenturyLink people from various operations, from their construction division, from corporate. And we also had our development team there and city representatives to discuss the site in detail. We were there and it was a hot day, and we walked all around the site and talked about some of the issues, and we talked about how we brainstormed some issues of how we could address their concerns. But they did come back within a week and stated that they would not be willing to take this site because of a few things that we could not address. And so those few things include that the slope that is on either side of the property, they were concerned concerned with that. There was also, the driveway to the location is sloped a bit, and so they were worried about their trucks during the inclement weather getting up and down that. And they also mentioned about the location itself was surrounded by trees and hard to see, and they were afraid that people could easily break into the area, even though it would be fenced. But security was one of those issues. The other issues they brought up, we felt we could address around site design, et cetera. So since that time, we have started to look at what other options are. Yes.
You mentioned it was in August that you met, that they were out on the site. Is that the first time that they'd seen the site?
No, we did a site visit before the MOUs were signed with 3 different people from CenturyLink. This is the first time we actually had the people who would be doing the construction, and we had some people from Arizona, we had some people from various sites of CenturyLink.
Thanks.
So then we continue conversation with CenturyLink. We've been working with their government affairs director and seeing if we could do anything to address, is there a way for them to reconsider this site? But we also started looking at other sites, to look where we could relocate CenturyLink. So they gave us criteria of about 4 acres along I-90 between here and Bellevue. And so there's not a lot of sites of 4 acres along really near adjacent to the highway, because they need that for their service trucks to easily service the area. But we did look at some various sites around the city, either to build the TOD on an alternative site or to relocate CenturyLink. And we contacted property owners that we actually contacted about 4 years ago when we knew that we had the potential to apply for the TOD funds, to see if their circumstances has changed, and there was no change of mind as far as willingness or interest in to redevelop their property. Is there another question? Looks like, yeah, okay. So we also explored and we looked at sites outside. We did look outside, and the development team as well looked at if there were other sites that we could locate CenturyLink outside the city, because that was not our first preference, but we wanted to, kind of have no stone unturned. And again, it was really challenging to find any sites outside the city that met their criteria. So one a site was recommended. So this is, again, the original slide was showing where the relocation site is. The red circle is basically the RV park that currently the city owns. And so we are starting to look at this site. We have not conducted any in-depth due diligence on the site, but believe that it meets CenturyLink's site needs, and we've been in initial conversations with them, providing them more details about it. And the development team's initial look at the property as far as can they build on this, does this make sense? Again, initially, they believe that would work. And if we were able to move forward with this, essentially the project, the TO project, would remain the same. It would just mean that the relocation site is in a different location. And so that is what we're here tonight to talk about, does that make sense? The site, again, has some positives. The reality, though, is that there are some other things that would change. So the timing of the site project would only be delayed by about 4 months, and that's an estimate, because there is a lease on, management agreement on the property, and that would end in December of 2020. And so during that time, the development team said they could begin to do design or redesign and permit the CenturyLink relocation site, so they wouldn't lose as much time as a whole year. But the RV park, as mentioned in the staff memo, was previously slated for an expansion of the city's shops and facilities. So as we were looking as growing as a city and the needs increased there, the city did look and master plan that and have some plans for that. But again, as we've tried to look at all different options for where the TOD could go, we've come to this as the last option that we have been able to identify. So that said, that means that if we decide not to pursue this, we will then inform our partners that the TOD cannot go forward at this time. Looking at what kind of financial impacts there may be. So again, we were going to transfer the property from the King County Roads property directly to CenturyLink as part of this project. We did discover today, again, without doing a lot of due diligence before this, so we will do more research if council agrees it makes sense, that the RV park was purchased with some utility funds, and so we would need to look into the ability to dispose of that property and what would need to be done with that. So again, we did not spend a lot of time researching before we came here. We wanted to find out from you if it made sense to do that. The multi-family tax exemption wouldn't change. The fee waivers, which is already for any affordable housing development in the city, stays the same, and the Opportunity Center would stay the same. The lease or the management agreement revenue that the RV park brings in would be reduced, but that wasn't intended to be a long-term or a revenue source for the city ongoing. I'm going to go to option B unless you'd like to stop and talk about option A first. Yes.
Vicki.
Thanks. So there isn't a lot of information in terms of dollars on this slide, but I'm wondering approximately what the value of the property is and what the difference between the King County Roads property and this property is.
We have not done an appraisal of the site, and I'm not sure if an appraisal was done previously. I'm looking back at our operations director. But we did an appraisal for the King County Roads site, but not for this site. So that would maybe one of the things that we would need to do if we proceed.
Okay, so with I guess with this financial impacts, it's hard for me to know what the financial impacts are. I think it's really important. So this seems like something that we need more information on.
Okay.
Chris?
Could we use the former King County Roads property to expand our operations center if that was needed?
Yes.
So we can
Yes.
repurpose that space for that purpose?
It is we own the property outright, and they actually are using part of it to store some things now, but yes, that would be possible.
And as you go into kind of working on the financial aspect of this, it'd be nice to know what the revenue that the RV park generates is. Thanks.
Mariah?
Thanks for the presentation, Jen. So how involved, and I'm sorry if I missed this, but I know that we're evaluating and looking at the RV park, but how much information have we gotten from CenturyLink about their overview of how they think that would work? Has it just been...
Initial conversation, so we've shared the information we've had. So when they rejected the King County Roads property site, they had a list of the criteria.
Okay.
And so we believe that meets this criteria. So the size, the location, it's a little more flat. There is some slope to the back of it, but we believe that will work for the development. And so I actually have sent all the information to our government relations staff at CenturyLink. And again, we have not wanted to spend a lot of time on this. We wanted to first come here and find out if this was something that you wanted to direct staff to continue to do. So they know we're here. They know that tomorrow morning I will be calling them and letting them know what the next steps are going to be, and they have been looking at it initially. So one of the things that, and Hal can attest to this as well, is that with a large company like CenturyLink, we have had multiple conversations with multiple people, so it's something that's not going to be one conversation and then they say, yeah, this works. And so making sure that we have that conversation is going to take a little longer and have the right people at the table for that, or on the phone call, because they're from multiple states.
Okay, so
Yeah.
it sounds like a queue-up conversation to say we think we
Yes.
have something that
Yes.
meets the criteria, and
We believe. Mhm.
we're going to talk to council about that.
Yeah.
And then, could you just talk about timelines in terms of TOD money?
Oh, money as in what's...
Yeah, just what, I guess just the timeline and how this new If this were to go forward, how would that fit within
Okay,
anything that we needed to do deadline-wise
sure.
in terms of money we're receiving?
Great
That
question.
would be my question.
So we would definitely, so the King County, I'm going to go back this way. The King County TOD fund, so that was awarded to King County Housing Authority, and so they will inform them about the status and the timing change, or at least, kind of letting them know this is our current timeline. While an official request or conversation hasn't been had, we believe that will not be an issue with them if we continue to move forward. But we really need to make sure that this site, is going to work for them. Work with the project. The state allocation, so that is on, we need to encumber those funds by June 30th, 2021. And so we would work with them to make sure that we initially had talked about some of those funds would be spent for the design portion of the TOD, and then the rest would be for the construction, and the development team requires a upfront kind of deposit on that. And so we would, depending on the timing of things, we'd work with them to ensure that we were able to either encumber or get a slight extension on that. And so Senator Mark Mullet would be in that conversation, because he was very helpful with us to have that conversation, or to get that allocation, and we'd work with the Department of Commerce on that. Again, have not had a formal request yet, but it seems likely that we'll be able to do that, but no guarantee. And then I think Arch, would also, allow us to extend the time if necessary for the $2 million. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you have a question? Okay. Jen, for clarification.
Yes.
You've said encumbered, so a purchase order has to be issued,
Yes. Yes.
which means that it means you're pretty far along in the process. Like there's a site, there's a plan.
Yes. Yeah. We wouldn't today encumber any money
Right,
towards
there's-
them.
Yeah, there's
Right.
no
We would.
PO to spend it
Right.
against.
Right. It would be, the money, again, would go towards the development of the project, so it would be paid to or encumbered to the development team or their contractors for that. Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to move on to, so again, we, as mentioned earlier, we wanted to get your feedback and questions about two options. So the second option is, if the TOD project does not move forward, what would we do about the Opportunity Center again? So we received a $3 million allocation from the state for this. Our suggestions would be working with the state to determine the ability to adjust the project parameters. So we presented the project as a TOD, but it was not required as part of the funding or the allocation pot. We believe that there are some spaces for lease that could potentially work for the health center. Again, speaking with our partner at Health Point, they are open to this. We didn't go too far down the line of having them come and look at sites yet, but the size, again, the Opportunity Center was 10,000 square feet. They have always said a little bit more size would be great, but looking at between 10 and 15,000 square feet, there's about 3 different sites that are available currently for lease. 2 of them are retail sites. There's another building that's for sale, so there's lots of option to kind of look at that if there's an appetite for that. And I think that we believe at this moment that we may not need to access the full, or if any, of the council approval for the up to $5.05 million that was allocated initially for the Opportunity Center. Again, 505 minus the $3 million from the state means that's a $2 million allocation commitment left. So we would come back if we went forward with this and determine that we found a space to lease. It doesn't require additional money beyond what the state is investing, or it requires a small portion or not. So we are looking at, again, looking at the previous commitments for this. As I mentioned, the 505. What I wanted to make sure that you understand, because I know you're talking about budget every other meeting you may have, and the 2.05 million right now is not in the CIP budget that's passed, but out of that 205, $965,000 was planned to be from a mitigation funding that was part of that $1 million towards human services and housing money. So that would be something, again, we would need to come back and work with the council on.
Stacy?
I'm confused by the term mitigation. Where did the word mitigation come from?
So it was a Talus Amendment number 1 that they made a payment of $1.5 million to the city, and $1 million of that was in this is the word segregated mitigation account for affordable housing. And then at the later, when the Together Center, project came around, that was slated for human services for that. So it's a separate account, mitigation for the Talus Development Agreement Amendment.
Okay, I just want to make sure that, it seems like some of the history of that money has gotten lost and conflated during the last couple of years. Because every time we talk about it, if 6 months or a year passes, then it kind of gets described as something else.
Okay.
So anyway, that's where I wanted to make sure we weren't talking about that this was some sort of an official, like mitigation, like impact fees.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, no.
Okay.
So, yes, I did some research on this to track it down, and actually our finance director, has researched it and knows where it is, and so there's resolutions that were passed in the past by
Right.
council. We have the amendment that was signed, it kind of talks about that, so I have
Right.
all that paper
The
trail.
money set aside trying to look for the, help me out,
Human Services Campus.
the campus.
Yes, Together Center, yes.
Yes, and we have not, as a council, talked about putting that toward Opportunity Center that I remember, but maybe we did.
So and then this is getting into the weeds, so when we were here talking about options for the Opportunity Center, the sources and uses tables that were attached to that did show the mitigation money as part of that, yeah. And then the remainder was going, it wasn't defined yet, but it potentially could have been a bond, could have been some other way. So-
And it's not allocated yet? It's not, you're saying it's not in the, it's not,
Correct.
okay.
Correct.
And also, for the record, it was mitigation in lieu of developing the final 51 of their 100 affordable units in Talus.
Thank you.
Lindsay?
Thanks. So it sounds like that mitigation fund was for affordable housing, but we're considering potentially using it for Opportunity Center?
So it was initially for affordable housing, and then go ahead. Is that not right?
No, there initially was more
No.
than that. It was 1.5 million. There was $500,000 for affordable housing, but there was $1 million for the Human Services Campus.
Okay.
35,000 of which was spent on a feasibility study. So that's the balance, and it was for a Human Services Campus, which is very similar in concept to the
Yeah.
Opportunity Center.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so again, we are not here making a specific recommendation to say do this versus that, but we do need to have some feedback so we know kind of where to move forward. So we plan on the next few months to, depending on what this discussion tonight is, to pursue those either option A, option B, or both at the same time, and then plan to come back by the end of the year, beginning of next year to update and take the next steps.
Okay, thank you. Ollie?
If I may, just a couple of comments. I'm in week 4. Week 1, the council president raised this issue at leadership and asked for a status. And so at that point, I inquired of the staff and heard what you've just heard now. My concern upon hearing this was something different than how it was left with you last, and I felt it was important to bring this information back to the council as quickly as possible, and so this was the first opportunity we had in order to do this. Staff looking at this project, understanding the importance this project has had to the council, we felt that we needed to come this evening with the best options available. And as Jen has outlined, the property issues are very narrow, very specific, and there's not a lot available. And really, what we've put forward this evening, the property that we own with this RV park, is what we think makes the best sense. It just so happens that we're the property owner, but as we've spent time looking at this, Brett Heath very properly has brought to all of our attention nearly 20 years of work that the city of Issaquah has done, master planning its facility operations. So this is not only public works, but it's fleet, facility maintenance. And so that property has been a key part of that. That property was procured with that in mind. So as you go forward this evening and talk more about this, I felt obligated to raise that issue for you. Brett is here, and if you would like more details at an appropriate point, he's certainly here and can speak to that. We recognize as staff that we should have more information for you, and other circumstances, I think we would have gathered that information before coming to you. But because there are a number of partners involved in this project who knew of the meetings with CenturyLink, knew of the outcomes of those meetings, and the City Council of Issaquah did not, I was concerned to bring everybody up to speed and have you on the same page. So, Councilmember Winterstein and members of the council, as you discuss this evening, I just wanted to make sure that you understood the context, understood that we understand from staff how important this project is. We want to give you the tools that you need to properly evaluate the situation and make recommendations, which I think Jen has done an excellent job setting that table. We have other staff. Keith has been involved in this from the very beginning and certainly has history and insight as well, but I would encourage you to ask if you need to. So thank you for indulging me to put a little bit of context on this, and we stand ready to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to open it up to the council. There is no recommendation from the administration, and so if this is going to move at all, it's going to be based upon our discussion right now. Tula.
So I want to thank the administration for quickly putting together some information to get council up to speed on the latest developments. We've been working on this a long time now, but I continue to believe CenturyLink is committed to trying to make this work. I would like to know more information about option A. If the options in front of us are find out more about option A, or generally pursue the option B or C, pack up our toys and go home. I think there's questions around option A. I don't think anybody's ready to say, wow, what a slam dunk, hooray. But some of the questions that have already been identified around the financial values involved, I think are worth identifying. I think we have a number of facilities locations around the city. I think that if this was the right fit, with that RV park has been there for a while, and we haven't needed it for another purpose, and we do have other yards. So I would very much like to find out more about option A. I would hate to think that we would just, again, pack up our toys and go home. So I'm all for finding out more about option A. Oh, I'm
Finding
sorry.
out more. Go ahead.
Well, sorry, one final comment on that. It was mentioned that there are alternative health center locations. I have a concern about there being transit-oriented. To me, one of the core pieces about this potential project is the fact that it is right next to a transit center. And I think those of us who have wanted to see an opportunity center or something like it in this area have seen a number of proposals that I think had a certain skepticism in the community about how accessible they were to transit. And this, because it's right next to the transit center, fits in line both with the vision of transit-oriented development, both for housing and the opportunity center, as well as meeting the requirements of the financial instruments that we've identified so far. Thank you.
Thank you. Lindsay.
I would agree with Tola's assessment of the idea that we need more information about option A, but it's at least worth it to look into. I would also say that in general, it sounds like the RV park is fairly underutilized when it comes to affordable housing. I know there's certain concern of the idea of displacing people that are in a current affordable housing with something else. But from what I understand, only 50 of the 130 spaces are currently leased, and they're RVs as temporary leases, not mobile homes as long-term leases. So I would like some more information. I had something I was going to request, but I don't remember it right now.
Thank you. Mariah?
So I would definitely like to get more information about option A. We have been working on this for a long time. We have multiple partners involved and timelines that we're dealing with. And I would like to be able to move forward and at least get all of the information about whether this is an acceptable location and to better understand implications with the city and the, what we had intended to do with that originally. But it sounds like it does meet the parameters or may meet the parameters so far, so I'd really like to get more information. And just to echo what Tola had talked about, I do think if we're looking at other locations for the Opportunity Center, the transit-oriented piece of that was a very big deal. So if we end up going down that pathway, that would be important. And also appreciate Lindsay's initial, I believe it was your question and email to get further information about the RV park and the occupants there and that kind of thing. So that was really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And so far, all three of the first three who have spoken all asked for more information now. Other than maybe financial information, I don't know what that more information is. So if you're going to ask for more information, please offer it. Go ahead, Vicki.
So one piece of more information that I would like to know is if people are, the uses that people have for the RV park. So are they living there, or are they leasing spaces to just store the RVs there? I think it is important to know in terms of, I think it's important to know the impact if we decide to go forward with this. And I think the impact will be substantially different depending on how people are using those spaces. And I don't actually know that we have that information. We know that there's 50 spaces, they're occupied by vehicles. I don't know if people are residing there or not. So I definitely would like to better understand that. And then the other questions I had, one of them is about that this isn't in the CIP. So I wondered about that. Part of it is, does that have an explanation for why this isn't in our planning document?
But I will get more information, yes. So I don't have an answer for that right now.
Okay. I think that would be good to know as we consider budget, if it's sort of, if it's in the budget, if it's not in the budget now, and we're discussing budget, we should consider it now. And then I also wondered, and since we do have Brett, I wondered if you could speak to this. There's a sentence that caught my eye in the memo. It should be further, the King County Roads property may be suitable for PWO to utilize for future needs. It should be noted further that the Lower Reed Infiltration Gallery area may be available for potential expansion opportunities, but further evaluation is necessary. And so I just, also based on other information that was provided tonight, I'd like to better understand how, to the best of our knowledge right now, how suitable are other sites for this expansion versus the current plan?
Okay, well, thank you. The King County site, you realize is above the RV site, so that's physically disconnected from the current site. It shares part of the property line with the south property, which is the same parcel that our our administration building is currently located on. So the RV park is on the same parcel that the administration building is on, and the south half of that property shares a common property line with the King County property. So because of the property lines and the topography in that area, connecting those two is not particularly necessarily an easy thing to do. So it's a physical separation, certainly not as efficient using that site as the site down below. I don't believe the area is as large either. The area on the L rig is about roughly, I think there's roughly 30,000 square feet that's usable, something like that. So, obviously we haven't done any layouts on those sites because they weren't part of the master plan process. The other issue, one of the other issues with the RV park site is we have regional utilities that serve as Issaquah Highlands on that property, on the RV park property. So, we would have to take a look at what that layout might look like, but essentially it's kind of disjointing how operations facilities would flow because they wouldn't be connected.
Okay. So in your estimation, would it be suitable or suitable but suboptimal, or how
Well,
would you
certainly
characterize it?
suboptimal.
Okay.
I mean, yeah.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for that. And then I had one further question about the mitigation funds. Do they expire?
No.
No expiration on those?
No.
Okay, good to know. Okay, so for me, overall, my comments is I would like to better understand the financial impact, both the revenue, just so that we do our due diligence and understand how much money we're talking about, how the valuation of this property versus the other property. I would also really like to better understand the implications for people that are currently using the park, and I would also like to understand if we are thinking about spending this $2 million, but it's not currently in the budget, how that works given our budget situation currently. So there seem like there are a lot of outstanding financial issues as well as logistics. So this is definitely not a slam dunk for me. I'm also not, I also have for a long time been enthusiastic about the prospect of having affordable housing with market rate housing together at this site by the transit center, by the park and ride. And so it's not a slam dunk for me, but I'm also not, I think we're not in a position to completely rule it out based on the information we have. But I also would like to know other potential locations for the Opportunity Center. I think that having it be by transit, by a bus route, we're not particularly well-served by transit in our community. So I think that is important, but I also think one of my concerns going back to previous conversations is that the park and ride right there, the transit center that is there is a park and ride, and it's currently at 98% plus utilization according to King County usage reports. So there may be other locations that have transit stops that would also be able to serve people. I would just like to consider those options, given that I don't think option A is a slam dunk.
Thank you. And for the record, speaking earlier was Brett Heath, our Director of Public Works Operation, or PWO. Thank you, Brett. Chris, then followed by Stacy.
Great. Always been a big fan of transit-oriented development. Would love to see that in town. It appears to me that the only TOD option that's on the table is option A. Option B is really not a TOD option at all. We have to understand the cost implications, and as Brent mentioned, some of the operational implications before we can move forward. And I want to just amplify what Councilmember Hunt said, which is we need to understand the people using that RV park, what they're using it for, because the worst thing we could do is be to displace a population of people who are living there. Though it's good to re-engage with CenturyLink at this time, I think it needs to be clear that we are far from making a decision on moving forward with this parcel, and so we'd like to get them engaged, but I think we've still got a lot of work to do, and I'd like to know kind of what the decision-making timeline would look like. When would we expect to see something in terms of information come back, and then when would we get to a decision point? I'm really concerned about option B. I don't understand the city's role in option B if we're leasing the property. Jen, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I'm sorry. So actually, they would actually lease the property, so we would help facilitate finding them a location, and that's where, again, we would come back. That's our initial thinking right now, again,
Okay.
not going out and talking, but if they were willing and able to pay a rental rate that is maybe a little below market right now, and not in new construction, but in some of the properties we looked at. So I don't think that we would be renting it and then giving it to them, you know, and then leasing it back to them. But again, we haven't gone down that road to look at all the options, so that's why we may have less of a financial commitment than necessary.
Great. So if option A isn't viable, which I think is the only TOD option, then I think we really need to take a step back and re-engage with the public if we're to really understand because I don't know what we're talking about with option B. It seems very squishy to me, and we need a whole lot of clarity, and I would like to get some public input on whatever it is we are planning to do. So thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Stacy?
Thank you. So I agree with the comments of Councilmember Hunt and Councilmember Ray. Not that I don't disagree with other comments, but I think, and they're the most recent, so they're the ones I remember. Just kidding. So I think I just want to re-emphasize the user, knowing more about how those spaces are used over the RV park. And I think because where my mind goes is that there seems to be even if they're not there, you know, like a long-term, year-long lease or something, there seems to be a demand for very inexpensive RV parking in recent years. You don't have to have a mobile home to be living somewhere. I need an RV and park it somewhere, and it looks like this is an inexpensive place to do it. The CIP does say that the first expenditure for Phase 2 won't be till 2022. So even though we may have some contract running out at the end of the year, I can see the RV park being there for many years. We're in the middle of a very significant budget event right now, and it's possible that, you know, I don't know, Brett, but it's possible that, you know, that Phase 2 is in the years out, and so I'm very concerned about displacing people. A related question is, how does that RV parking fit in with our housing strategy and the need for affordability? I agree with the option B being it's a non-starter for me, at least at this point, when you're asking about feedback, because it's not a TOD centered. And all the budget questions, I have the same ones. So I'll stop there, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Lindsay, before you go, let me make my comments.
Yeah,
I haven't
go for
been able
it.
to speak yet. I think we're actually very fortunate. I think the importance of the TOD Center, including the TOD project, including the Opportunity Center, is so significant. I would be of the camp, we just do everything we can to make option A work. I think that is so significant. And very, very important, because when you look at the number of units and its location for all those benefits, the RV park is a mobile home, is a motor home park. They've got wheels, they've got motors. And so that offers opportunities for relocation that is not the same as somebody living low income, I think, who just happens to be in a place in Issaquah. I think, so I'm not completely unsympathetic, but if those were homes, that would be different. We're talking about people with motors and wheels. And finding another place to park. So I'm just being very candid about where I am. I have one question and then a final point to make too. The funding about the whole TOD thing, we lost this equity investor that's mentioned in your letter, is that you didn't even touch upon that. So the whole thing going forward as envisioned is not being questioned right now.
I don't believe so. So the development team has been, so initially King County Housing Authority said they would be able to move forward with the project if an equity investor did not come forward. The development team has been in conversations, and there's some, there hasn't been anything signed on the dotted line, but there has been a lot of interest. So that's all I think we can say right now.
Okay, all right, thank you. And the last thing I want to put in there, that it's not just an academic exercise to potentially use that RV park land for facilities and parks. Actually, it also involves relocating the park maintenance, which is part of the Confluence Master Plan, which is on the south shore of the East Fork of Issaquah Creek. And so relocating that facility so that we could realize the vision for Confluence Park is also in the calculus, and it's another reason I'm a fan of this, trying to make this work.
I remembered my question. What would be the cost to the city of having to redo the plans for facilities? Just kind of, if we're going to have to create new plans for facilities on another location, that is essentially a cost to us and should be factored into the idea.
Okay, one more comment.
I'm going to make one more comment, which is a little bit off track. It has to do with option B, just because it's late October and I don't know if I'll get an opportunity to say this again. Ever since I was on the Human Services Commission for 3 years and then on council for almost 4 at the end of the year, we've been talking about the $65,000, the almost $1 million that we were trying to focus on first affordable housing or what we talked about for a human services campus. And I'm so hoping going forward that everybody remembers how long we have been talking about that and hoping that there'll be an alternative to go forward to do something impactful with those funds.
Okay, thank you. Jen, Wally, back to you.
So, Councilmember Winterstein, members of the council, I think the last question is when to come back. So Jen, what would be a reasonable time period?
So we plan on working due diligently the next few months, and we're thinking in either towards the end of the year or early next year, and if we can come back sooner, we will. And so there may be, depending on how far we go and learning about some of the challenges and some of the details of how much it would be to redo the plans and everything, we may have estimates or may have some additional information to do, but if we can get here sooner than that, we will try. So,
Okay.
but just to kind of basically say by the end of the year is what our plan is, and maybe the early next year.
Okay, and you received requests for multiple types of information this evening. I think just be very clear on minimally which of those you have answers for before you come back.
Okay, so is that a question or a statement? Sorry.
Well, it was a challenge.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, not Councilmember Winterstein, members of the council, nothing you've asked for is we can't find. I think it's just a matter of if you felt we needed to come back in 60 days, 30 days, then I think that would be challenged. And you all would be challenged because quite honestly, your dance card's pretty full over the next while. So I would think if we can wait until the new council seated in January, from a schedule perspective, that's the best. I think you all have to be comfortable as the current sitting council, if you're okay with that, or if you would like one last opportunity to talk about this before change.
Oh, okay.
And the other piece is how quickly CenturyLink can kind of respond to us, so that piece is something we can't control. So it may be more likely, again, that's where I'm like, maybe the beginning of the year, so.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Chris, do you? Oh, boy.
I just wanted to opine on the timeline. I think that there's a couple of council members who will not be part of this team next year that are heavily invested in this decision. I know that we have a full dance card, as Wally mentioned, up until the first meeting in December, but if there was some way to do it in the first meeting in December, I think that would be respectful.
I appreciate that very much, but I certainly, and I'm one of those, and I like to have it done right. Now, we are 18 minutes over time, so these are going to, you got 30 seconds at total. Mariah.
If there was the ability to get another touch on this year, that would be great, but it probably needs to make sense. So
Thank you, Tola.
I just want to reiterate, we are not fully in the driver's seat on this, right? We are the junior of the three partners in this. So definitely, I think council's made it clear the kind of information they would need to evaluate option A. We may have that before the end of the year. I certainly agree. It'd be great if we could address it before the end of the year, but if we can't, we can't, because it depends on partners that we don't control.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. We will, that concludes our first agenda item. We're going to move quickly on to item B, which is the 2020 legislative agenda. With us this evening is Jean Paul, management analyst from the executive office, and Shelley Helder from government affairs consultant. Welcome to you both. Now, I'm assuming you guys have this all scripted. I'm just going to hand it over to you right now.
That's correct.
Jean, over to you.
Good evening. I am Gene Paul. I'm the management analyst in the executive office, and Shelley Helder, our governmental affairs consultant from Gordon Thomas Honeywell, is also here this evening, and we're going to be presenting on the 2020 legislative agenda. Okay, two primary reasons for our presentation tonight. First, we'd like to provide information, and this will include an overview of the 2020 legislative session, the previously adopted agenda priorities, and the development of the administration's proposal for the 2020 agenda. The second reason for the presentation is to seek your feedback.
So diving right in, providing an overview of the 2020 legislative session. It will be the second year of the legislative biennium. It's scheduled to last 60 days. The primary objective of this session is for the legislature to adopt amendments to the existing biennial budgets. In 2019, the legislature adopted their operating, capital, and transportation budgets. They took effect on July 1st of 2019 and will run through June 30th of 2021. The current operating budget is a $52 billion budget, and that funds all of the state agencies, including the K-12 education system. Since the budget was adopted, the State Revenue and Economic Forecast Council has released information that forecasts are looking about $450 million higher than when the budget was adopted, which is definitely good news, though in a $52 billion budget, it's just a drop in the bucket, and we do anticipate operating revenues to remain constrained throughout the 2020 session. The capital budget is a $3 billion budget. This is what funds the state's investment in bricks and mortar projects, but excludes all transportation projects. There's roughly $70 million remaining in capacity for the 2020 capital budget, and a portion of that money will be set aside for local community projects. The last budget is the transportation budget, and this, as you all may recall, in 2015, the legislature adopted a 16-year transportation package called Connecting Washington. The state's transportation budget has been largely filled up with implementation of that package. And so the transportation budget is the most constrained of all three budgets. And for a couple other reasons that I'll get into in a moment, we anticipate that to be the case moving forward. In addition to developing their supplemental budgets, the legislature will also be considering dozens, hundreds of different policy bills. Every bill that was introduced in the 2019 session that did not pass the legislature will be reintroduced in the 2020 session and can be up for consideration. The political climate in 2020 will remain largely unchanged. Both House and the Senate will continue to be controlled by Democrats. The most significant item to note is that there will be a new Speaker of the House. Representative Lori Jenkins was selected by her colleagues to be the next Speaker of the House, and so longtime serving Speaker Frank Chopp will remain part of the caucus, remain part of the House, but will no longer be Speaker. Following the 2020 session, the entire House and half the Senate will be up for re-election. And following the 2020 November election, there will be the process of redistricting, which occurs every 10 years after the census. There are a couple items that we anticipate the legislature will be spending a good amount of time discussing, and a couple of them are related to transportation. The first will be determined based on the voters as a result of this November's ballot. I know you all are familiar with Initiative 976. Depending on the outcome of this ballot measure, if it is approved by the voters, the state will have some serious decisions to make, because it will not only impact, of course, local revenues, but also state revenues. And both the House and the Senate Transportation Committee chairs have indicated not only will they not be able to make new investments, but current projects that are slated for funding could be cut. The kind of counter to that statement is that if I-976 does not pass, the Senate Transportation Committee Chair last session released a proposal for investments in a new round of transportation projects throughout the state that would be funded through a series of new tax revenues and fees. That was proposed as Forward Washington. That made it out of the Senate Transportation Committee, but did not advance further than that. We have heard from the House Transportation Committee Chair, Representative Jake Fye, that he intends to put forward his own package. And even if 976 does pass, he's stated that he would still like to begin developing the project list. So maybe not discussing revenues in 2020, but at least discussing what projects would need to be funded if a package were available in the future. And so I mention all of that because although we don't anticipate a transportation package to make it over the finish line in 2020, large transportation packages like the 2015 Connecting Washington package take many years to develop. And so it's important that we are part of that conversation in the 2020 session. The last item related to transportation is in response to a report that was released earlier this year by the Joint Transportation Committee. And this is a report that looked at the needs of cities, city transportation, essentially city transportation needs throughout the state. And one of the most startling discoveries from the report is that cities are investing in preservation and maintenance, but there is an estimated $900 million backlog per year for cities cumulatively throughout the state of maintenance and preservation needs without existing resources to be able to accommodate that. And so in response to that report, the Association of Washington Cities is putting together a package, a bill that would increase local government resources, essentially expand transportation revenue options for cities to be able to use at their discretion. Again, this is something that, depending on what happens in November, may or may not make it across the finish line in 2020, but we think it's important to be part of the conversation. The last item that I'll touch on in this slide is housing and homelessness. This has been a topic at the state level for many years, and we anticipate it will continue to be. A couple of the items that are being discussed on the housing and homelessness topic are related to amendments to the multifamily property tax exemption. Currently, under the statute, if there's an affordable housing component used, there's a 12-year exemption. Some of the developments that have used that 12-year exemption are getting close to reaching that 12-year mark, meaning that those units would no longer be required to be affordable, and the property tax exemption would fall off. And so there's discussion right now of how to potentially extend that to 16 years. There's also discussion about how to expand that program to jurisdictions that don't meet the population threshold. Another item being discussed related to housing and homelessness is expansion, or I guess changing the current voter-approved sales tax authority for housing and homeless services to be a councilmanic authority. This is an item that's been introduced for several years and has hit a little bit of a roadblock in the past few years because of concerns from cities about how a county may implement that sales tax authority if they choose to use it prior to a city taking advantage of that. To provide you all with some awareness of what's happening more broadly, I thought I'd just touch on the Association of Washington Cities legislative priorities. And since they're on the screen, I won't mention all of them, but I will note that there are 7 priorities. The third priority on the left-hand side, create tax increment financing option for cities. This is a two-pronged approach. The first is a renewal of what's referred to as the Local Revitalization Financing Program. often referred to as TIF light, since Washington State's Constitution does not allow for true tax increment financing, which is the use of property tax. This TIF light program uses sales tax and has been used very successfully by many communities throughout the state. So the first approach would be to do a renewal of that program. Second would be to pursue a constitutional amendment to allow for true TIF. And that is more of a long-term approach that the association is wanting to begin in the 2020 session. So as we consider the priorities that are recommended before you this evening, I just wanted to provide a reminder on the guidance for developing a legislative agenda. First is that when we were before you last year, we recommended that council consider adopting a 2-year legislative agenda, which mirrors the state's biennial budget, and that is what you all adopted. What is exciting to report is that we were successful in accomplishing many of the items on that 2-year legislative agenda, and so what we're proposing to you this evening may look slightly different because we have accomplished many of those items. Of course, we want to take into account the political climate, which is the reason for sharing the previous information with you, and it's important to keep an agenda concise and clear. We always recommend keeping an agenda to 1 page. And then lastly, that we build on our previous successes. And just as a reminder, the items that we worked on last session was a request for $400,000 for designing the PFAS pilot cleanup program, so that was accomplished. Opportunity Center, the $3 million, that was secured. Funding for design, engineering, and right-of-way for the widening of State Route 18. Of course, the funding that was requested for that first phase was secured. This will be a carryover item in this next agenda. And then lastly, the streamlined sales tax mitigation funding. There was legislation that was requested in order to make this payment permanent. That legislation did not pass, but the funding was included in the biennial budget. So it was a short-term win. We are secure to receive those payments through June of 2021, but it remains something that we'll need to continue working on if the payments would be continued beyond June of 2021. With that, I'll turn it over to Jean to talk about the priorities that are recommended before you.
So to keep from burying the lead any further, I'll describe the proposed priorities as you see them on the slides, and then I'll describe how we identified these specifically. So we have 2 priorities for transportation. The first is a request to provide the funding needed to finish widening State Route 18 from Issaquah Hobart Road to Raging River. The second request is $3 million to begin the pre-design and environmental documentation process for an additional under-overcrossing of Interstate 90. And the third priority is about providing tools for the city to fund transportation and basic services. I'll provide the background on how we identified these. As described earlier, we were very successful in the first year of our adopted priorities. As the administration looked at potential projects to take the place of the PFAS cleanup design and the Opportunity Center, several points became clear. First, although there will be future funding requests to complete the PFAS cleanup efforts in the Issaquah Valley Aquifer, it's too soon to include another request in this agenda. Second, the city does not have another non-transportation capital project with regional benefits like the Opportunity Center that would be a strong candidate for state funding. Next, the previous support for the Front Street Interchange Justification Report was based upon the expectation of the final recommended solution, including an additional over-under crossing of Interstate 90. And finally, as Shelley described, there's the expectation of a transportation package to begin coming together during this next session, and being a part of early conversations around the package improves our chances for future funding. So that explains our focus on transportation in the agenda. And the reason these projects were chosen specifically is because they're the most competitive for state funding. They help alleviate safety and congestion issues on state routes and interstates, and the under-overcrossing will also support the future Sound Transit station. For the third priority of fiscal sustainability, Shelley also mentioned that AWC is advocating for a discussion around local transportation revenue tools. There are also discussions expected for other local revenues like the 1% cap on the property tax. The statement of the agenda is a way of expressing the city's position that we support tools that allow the city to sustain the services the community desires. There's going to be an opportunity in 2 more slides for feedback, but I'd like to pause here and see if there are questions before we move on to the policy manual.
Any questions? Jean, at what point there, so I have one like addition I want us to consider.
Okay.
When would that, let us know when you think that's appropriate.
Sure.
So as Jean mentioned, the policy manual is before you as well. And just to remind you all of the distinction between the legislative agenda and the policy manual, the primary audience for the legislative agenda is our delegation, the 5th and the 41st district legislators. The primary audience for the policy manual is city staff and myself and my team as your government affairs consultants. It allows us to be nimble as legislation's introduced. If it's something that the city supports, we already know it because it's already been adopted within the policy manual. So there are a handful of changes. We're not going to go through every single one, but to just call out the distinctions, there were issues that were, there are new topics included. Those were the bills that were introduced in 2019 that the city took a position on of support or oppose or monitor. The general topics are the multifamily tax exemption, which I touched on earlier, clean fuels standard, which I understand you all had a briefing on recently, fish blocking culverts. This is something that, again, the Association of Washington Cities is continuing to advance as one of their priorities, and we're supporting them in that effort. And then somewhat of a defensive position is support for local land use decisions. Last year there was quite a bit of battle around local permitting, land use, and specifically accessory dwelling units, and we anticipate those discussions to return in 2020.
So this is the opportunity for you to provide your feedback, and the first question we're asking is essentially for the agenda priorities that we have proposed. Are they clear and correct? And this would be an opportunity for Councilmember Bernstein to propose an alternative.
Well, let's start, I think, our top three, right? We're talking about those three. Does any of my colleagues have any comment or input? Vicki?
I have a quick question about the overcrossing. With the IJR, I'm just wondering about the status of that request and if it's going to be reframed or how we might be requesting that. Like, what's the way in which it is requested, because the status of the IJR is different now.
Yeah, so I'll start, and if you want to fill in the blanks. So in response to the question specifically about the IJR, from my understanding, it is not WashDOT has not made a request of the legislature for funding of construction for the IJR. They've obviously completed the work and it is ready to move towards construction, but there isn't funding allocated for that. In terms of how this request would, I guess, marry with the IJR, I think it was one of the options that was considered as an alternative, and so I think it would be proposed as an alternative option to the proposals within the IJR.
Okay.
You have a follow-on, Vicki?
No, but I did just want to request that we can say what the IJR stands for if anybody is wondering about that.
Yes, interchange justification report.
Yeah, thanks.
Not that that clarifies anything, Tola.
Thanks, Paul. So I agree that the overcrossing, undercrossing is important, and I'm happy to see that it's a priority for us. But one of the things that I'm not sure, I think that WashDOT talked about the impact of, when they evaluated that option, its impact on the thing that they're primarily concerned about, which is the exit lanes at interchange 17. But one of the things I feel like we're a little bit in the dark on is, traffic is such a critical issue in the city, but I don't really have a great answer. If somebody from the community tells me how much would the overcrossing, undercrossing impact traffic in the city, I'm not sure I have a clear answer to that question. And I think about it because we talked about signalization last night and how we saw an opportunity to have our lights be aligned with the state at interchanges 15 and 17. These are all topics that I feel like I want to be better armed. Like if we're able to talk about what the impact of an overcrossing would have on traffic in Issaquah, and assuming it's substantial, that allows us and allows you to better speak with our legislators about what this would mean for this community. Thanks.
I'm going to pile on that, and Lindsay, I'll get to you afterwards. In fact, I was going to say something very similar. The IJR, actually, the scoring, the undercrossing option did not lose by much. And if indeed they're going to go forward with a recommendation for the one that, whatever it's called, the one that doesn't include undercrossing, that certainly, as Tola said, is a benefit to the state's customers on the highway. But it's not so beneficial to us. And that's the painful thing for where they ended up. What's painful for me is that overcrossing could have served so well their customers and done a world of good for us. And so there may be some specifics, Tola, but this is my answer to your question. And this is what I'd love the people at the state to know, is that our state is growing. We manage ourselves under GMA. We are inside of that. We are doing our share, kind of as a good community as far as the overall plan, including the designation of a regional growth center. And that whole planning, including the capacity that we created both for jobs and for housing, was based upon a transportation plan that would not work unless there was an overcrossing. Our plan for growth and our role in this region to handle growth per the new Vision 2050 that's going to be coming out, it requires that we have a transportation grid better than we have now, and it requires, matter of fact, the whole thing doesn't work without a new undercross or overcrossing. And so the benefit to us and to the region it goes beyond just, do we now have safety for people queuing to get off I-90 at Front Street? Which is an important question, but there are other ramifications, and I think that would be a key part. I mean, I'm really glad to see this here. I think it's going to be here for many years. I think, and I'm really glad, I do appreciate, this is my feedback, is I'm really glad to see this here. A couple months ago in a leadership meeting, I asked the mayor, appoint a czar. This project, this thing is like the number one. It's way out there. A lot of it's beyond our control, but we have to keep a laser focus on this agenda item and work with everybody at the state level and even our other partners, perhaps locally. That Issaquah and our vision and what's going to happen to us, it very much depends, and our role within the region and that growth management very much depends on having a new alternative. So I'm very glad to see that there. And I learned tonight about how we're not funded all the way through construction on Highway 18, so absolutely continue to support that one as well. Lindsay?
Yeah, so not on these top three, but just as a concept, one of the things that would help our traffic and would help traffic regionally is improvements on the county roads. And so I had talked to some of our legislators about they are considering the possibility of a different funding mechanism that would maybe provide the county some ability to do some improvements to those roads. And so while that wouldn't be money to us, it would benefit us in a way. Similarly, at the Eastside Transportation Partnership, there was a meeting a few months ago that all of the city members were encouraging our state legislators to create a funding mechanism for that. So I would be interested in including that. I think, we probably have to play around with that idea because it's ultimately not, it's actually encouraging money to go to a county rather than a city. But I think in the long term, it benefits us as well.
Thank you. Any other comments? Vicki?
So on the questions, I think the priorities are good. I think the State Route 18 is one that we certainly hear a lot from the community about, and something that we absolutely have to work with on the state level to make any improvements. So I think that priority is clear. And then I also think that the overcrossing is another one that's very important, and also one that we need to work with on the state. So I think those are good and are in line with the community. And I wanted to raise a few other things that One thing I didn't see, which is that in the last legislative session, there were a number of tenant protection bills that were passed. So for example, raising the number of days for eviction notices. And this is something that we did have for a period of time last year on council. We had a number of concerns from residents about that were renting, that were concerned about that. And so that is one that I had sent Jean some emails about when they were in session and was interested in tracking those progress. So I don't know if council would consider that, but I think you mentioned that they might make amendments and things, and so I would like to really make sure that we do keep those strengthened tenant protections that were passed. I think that would be to the benefit of those in the community, and I would like to see that added, and I didn't see that anywhere in here. And then the other one is that I know we have the same priority regarding recycling and trying to have product stewardship. Recycling seems to be one that is increasingly a challenge for our state based on a number of different things, but I think if we could just work with the state to have those better product stewardship and potentially other policies that would support our ability to reduce our waste that's going to landfills, for example, that would also be great. And I noticed that priority hasn't changed, but at the same time, I think our ability to recycle is changing. So I'd like to see more of an emphasis on that, or more potential policy exploration in that area.
Thank you, Vicki. Anybody else? Stacy?
I think the priorities are clear and correct, and I appreciate the work that you've done on this. I'm only going to mention it because Vicki brought up the issue of the tenant protections that were added to the RCWs last year. I think the flip side of that coin is that one concern out there is that we already have a very tenant-friendly laws in the state, and so the more tenant-friendly they become, the more concerns there are from landlords about providing rental housing. And so that's one potential unintended consequence. So I guess before we do any additional lobbying on that, I think my preference would be that we have more information about that topic as a whole.
Raya?
So just quickly will agree with what we've set as the priorities. We've talked a lot about widening State Route 18, and I won't repeat, but the importance of the over-under crossing and just some of the information that we did get during that IJR report out, that making sure that that's focused on Issaquah as well as what the state needs, and then the local fiscal sustainability. I think that we've got the right priorities there, and just both Vicki and Stacy have talked about the tenant rights as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is anybody who's not have any comments? That's fine. I believe you're through your material, right? And
Well, yes, I guess we had one more slide to just kind of cover the next steps.
okay, all right, so you do have one more slide. What I wanted to mention, and I don't know if this is appropriate for the policy book or not, but we learned last night that there is actually state code that prevents the city from actually doing its own PWO projects when they're over a certain dollar amount, and that's going to force us to spend perhaps over $100,000 or more than we would have if we could have done this project ourselves. I don't know, and I just learned about that last night. It's a shocker that there's a law out there, and I'm not sure what it's protecting. I have no idea what it's protecting. But we had a project, we scoped it out over $116,000, can't do it yourself, have to go to bid, don't get the advantage of the 35% discount on capital project if we'd have done it ourselves, and now we're looking at a proposal for over $300,000 in cost. And if that can be rooted out and somebody can figure that out, I don't know, Gene, how that fits, but it'd be great to learn a little bit more about that. I don't know if we've ever run into it before. I don't know how rare or necessary it is, but I think it has a real financial impact on Issaquah, but I know that's how much I know about it.
Okay.
So I've got a couple of questions based on the comments. So with the slide, we're prepared to come back with documents to the full city council on the 18th of November. There were issues raised regarding tenant protections. My recommendation is that if the council would like to pursue that, that we would then come back with some amendments to the policy manual, because as I look in the Affordable Housing, Health and Human Services and Homelessness section on page 87 of your packet, that would be where we would make that add. So Councilmember Winterstein, if you'd like us to come back to the council meeting on the 18th and have language drafted to deal with tenant issues, or just come back with information, that'd be the first question.
So that's a regular council meeting?
Yes. So the
So
idea is that
we would be taking action on that?
That's correct.
And that'll be our next touch?
That's correct.
All right, so there'll be a little bit of a mini committee meeting when we do all that, but I think based upon, I mean, let everybody, I'm open to all comments right now, but I think based upon, I think you're asking, do you want it then drafted, available? We heard both comments for and a concern against, and I would ask that you honor that and make sure if there are two sides of that issue that you daylight that. Stacy?
I was going to make a suggestion, and I know it's on the fly, but it is a brand-new law, and it just went into effect, the brand-new protections. And I'm wondering if it's sufficient for our purposes to just keep a watch on that, to see what the feedback is and how it's working, not working, how it's helping. And now that the folks who are out there watching for us know that we have concerns, I'm wondering if just keeping a watch on that issue, and if something happens mid-session that we need to weigh in on. Other than that, we can keep a watch on what the experience is after the law's been in effect for a year or so and see if we need to weigh in. That was my suggestion.
Thank you. Vicki?
I think that is mostly in line with my request. So my request was that this was just passed, and you mentioned that some of the main purposes or some of the main activities that will be in this legislative session is making amendments, and so I wanted to not roll back this, and so I think if the event, or if in the event of amendments, if we were to then be able to weigh in, I would want to weigh in. But also there isn't like lobbying for an action. It's more that I think we've heard this concern from the community about the very short number of days that you could evict somebody, and so that's been changed in particular, and that's something that I would like to not see rolled back immediately. So I think I'm mostly in line with the suggestion.
And if I could chime in, I'll just clarify. So there will be amendments to the budgets, but I don't anticipate that there would be amendments to legislation that just passed. So I think hearing what both of you are saying, I think we could draft a statement that reflects that in the policy manual along the lines of we would be monitoring implementation of recently passed landlord tenant protection acts. And if there are changes to the legislative intent, then we would come back to the council and seek feedback.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I was going to point out that in our policy manual, we use verbs like supports, opposes, want to ensure, closely monitor, and this may fall into that category.
So that was one. The other was regarding product stewardship, and there is language in the existing policy that Issaquah will support legislation to expand product stewardship programs to address the overall rising costs and increased challenges of recycling. So I guess my question is that language sufficient to meet Councilmember Hunt's concerns? Would you like that strengthened?
I think the wording is sufficient. I I know that our challenges in that area are increasing, and I don't know that there have been substantial policy to address it. And so I was more flagging it because it's something that we've seen both in the context of landfill expansion, and then also that our challenges with actually recycling recyclables under the current situation regarding various things. But yeah, so I think it was more just flagging that as something that I think it would be good for us to lobby, because it seems to be a growing need.
So we'll go ahead then, Councilmember Winterstein, and
Yes.
leave that language, draft a monitor statement, and that'll be included in the document for you on the 16th,
Is it-
on the 18th.
Was there anything else?
Just to review the dates, the legislative breakfast then, so the culmination of this process is the legislative breakfast, which is scheduled for December the 9th.
Which is a Saturday.
I don't think so.
Should be a Monday?
It's a Monday.
Oh, December, okay.
December.
I was looking at November, thank you.
And then things come back into play starting in January, and the AWC City Action Days. I don't know if there's been a past practice of having staff or electeds there, but that's always, in my experience, a good opportunity to have representatives from the city participate in those statewide action days, so we'll keep you posted on the logistics. If any of you are available to go, I think you'd be very welcome.
Very good, thank you. Is there anything else? Jean, Shelley, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for adapting to the circumstances this evening and for your good presentation. Thanks to you both. Okay, we're moving on to the final agenda item, utility rates and water system planning. Our Director of Public Works Engineering, Sheldon Lynn, is in the first chair on this, but I believe he has some backup. He's got a team here. And Sheldon, I'm gonna make a statement, and I want you to respond or correct that. And all we're really trying to do is really tee up what we're trying to do today. And maybe you're going to do that already, but we've had so many things. There's a lot of different topics that we discuss here in this room, but this one in particular, right? There was a study, then there was a plan, and we adopted that plan, and it called for the development of this, of the water. I call it water treatment. I don't know if that's the right description, because it's. But anyway, and then we did the rate study and found out about what the financial impact would be. And there's a lot of policies mixed up in that as well, as far as different sources and conservation and all of that. Now we're in that budget period, and that assumption of the capital expenditure is in the proposed budget, also with a related sales tax addition to both water, stormwater, and sewer, and the inclusion of cable as well in that area. But there's many different ways that not only from a budget, financial, policy, but just impact to the businesses in the city, the citizens that live here right now. There's a reason why we did the water system plan came up with it did. And I think for this council, it's been my impression that it's a really good idea to kind of circle back to the very basis for why we even see what's in the budget proposal that's in front of us right now, especially when you get to that water system plan, the need for a water plant, and how we got to that. So I think it'd be very good. I think that's a comprehensive view. That's what I was hoping out of that. So there's my claim that you're going to be able to do or not. If you could correct any of that, I'd love to hear it.
I'll try to live up to that. Yes, I believe the presentation will address what you're talking about. And so thank you, Paul, for that introduction. As you said, I'm Sheldon Lynn, Public Works Engineering Director. With me tonight, I have Robert York, or Bob York, who's the Utility Engineering Manager in Public Works Engineering, as well as two consultants here from HDR who actually performed the analysis of the rate studies, Sean Korn and Josiah Close. beginning with a little bit of the history and so forth. The purpose of tonight's presentation is to follow up with items from the September study session and to get direction from the City Council regarding the preparation of rate ordinances for Council's consideration at a future regular council meeting. Specifically at the September study session, the Council provided input and requested further information related to the policy direction related to the construction of centralized treatment as adopted in the water system plan, more information on the detailed analysis that went into the rate studies, basis for the rate comparisons, i.e. how much water do people use, what are some specific rate drivers that are identified in the rate study, the aggregate costs associated with the increases to household on a per capita basis as well as a per household basis, and then what's the value to the ratepayers that they receive as a result of the rate increases. I'll begin with the water system policy conversations. In June, July, September, and December of last year, 2018, the Council was briefed and provided direction to the administration on 3 key policy issues for inclusion in the water system plan. Those 3 policy issues were conservation and demand projections, which affected the timing of when additional regional supply would be needed for the valley floor. Supply management strategies, which addressed how best to manage the supplies to keep costs down. And then finally, treatment alternatives. As part of that conversation, the 20-year present value of the different alternatives were provided in December of 2018. One of the options was to blend groundwater with the regional water to maximize the use of groundwater so that the city only utilized as little as possible for the regional water. That net present value is $38.9 million. The next option had a combination of things with Cascade Water Alliance, where the city would convert and use all regional water and basically mothball its wells. If we were to retain the wells, the net present value at that time was estimated to be $75.9 million. If we were to transfer the wells to Cascade, the net present value of that option was $58.6 million. The other option considered was to reduce groundwater in certain areas so that we could prolong our use of the groundwater wells and just progressively move through the system to minimize how much regional water we would take at any time. The net present value of that option was 43.7. The lowest of the net present values was to blend groundwater with regional water to the maximum extent feasible. You have a question?
You read my mind. How did you know?
Yeah.
But you're on a roll there. You get a more natural breaking place. You want to continue?
Anywhere you'd like.
Okay. So you have it up there, conservation demand projections. I think what's very important is to be reminded in why are we even having this conversation? You said already about demand or the ability, I think, to fulfill demand on the valley floor. So please correct me if I'm wrong here, but of course, the valley floor principally is served by our wells. And based upon growth projections within that geographic area or the area currently served by our wells, it's that the demand will outstrip our ability to supply from our wells. Can you add any color commentation to that and what the timing of that is?
Yes, I can. Based upon the demand projections and the conservation level that was incorporated in the water system plan, the wells, the capacity to provide water to the valley floor is roughly going to be exceeded in about the mid-2020s, 2024, 2025, in that time frame, based on the growth projections that the planning department have provided us in their comprehensive plan for land use. And that is driven by the central Issaquah plan area, which is approximately 900 acres that was rezoned back in 2013, I believe it was, for increased densities and so forth as a growth center as well. It's anticipated development within central Issaquah that's driving it.
Okay, and there's really not a no-action alternative, but just for color, what would be the implication of that?
The no action alternative related to, need some clarity, which
We didn't do any of those options
you didn't do any of those options?
that you gave earlier. I mean, I know we've adopted it in the plan. I just, what's
I
at
guess
stake? I just want
if you're saying
be
that
clear
the
about.
no action alternative is not to accept additional regional water and not to blend the water, then I guess what you're talking about is a moratorium.
Well, okay,
Or endangering, or providing
yeah. and-
water that doesn't mix very well.
It's about, we have a projection for growth, and there's a water, and there's a demand. We can, even with conservation measures, there's a demand that we can calculate from that. And so I think it's helpful for me at least, and to go back and just be reminded about why we're even having this conversation.
Okay. So to move on from here, the direction at the December 2018 study session was to include treatment and blend water with the regional water to the maximum extent possible. And in February 2019, the council adopted the water system plan with those policies within it. (2019) rate study. In your packet, there were the detailed reports from the consultant for the rate studies in each of the 3 utilities, as well as the general facilities charge studies. So if there are questions regarding that detail within those reports and so forth, I have HDR here that can help answer those questions. Maybe we could hold for those questions later in the evening once I finish the presentation.
Okay, we'll see. Go continue.
Yep. The average use basis, there was a question about that being 6 CCF versus 8 CCF as regional agencies use. We used very specific utility data for Issaquah customers. It comes out as 6 CCF per month, which is 12 CCF bi-monthly, which is what we use. Thank you. CCF is 100 cubic feet of water, or in gallons terms, about 748 gallons per CCF. So rate drivers that are identified in the rate study, there was 4 of them. Unanticipated expenditures since the last rate study have impacted the fund balance. The reduced fund balance in the water utility removes the opportunity to pay cash for planned capital projects, thereby causing needs for increases in rates and large debt issuances. I want to backtrack here for a second, because the rate drivers in and of themselves individually don't create the issues. It's a combination of those, and how you want to look at this is they all interrelate to one another. So one will impact another less than the others. And so the unanticipated expenditures, as I mentioned, impacted the fund balance.
Could you, for us, remind us of what those expenditures were?
Oh, yes, the expenditures that were unanticipated were related to the PFAS contamination in well 4 and the studies and the treatment that we've had to do since. And those started in 2016, and to date, the cost for those have been somewhere $1.5–2 million.
Total, not per annum?
Total, not per year. Another factor, another rate driver, were increases in cost allocations. The cost allocation, this question came up as we were talking in in the last meeting we had. The differences in the water utility increased from 2019 to 2020 were almost $500,000 cost allocation increases. In the sewer utility, it was about $210,000 increase. I didn't put that one on there because it seems the focus is going to be on the water utility mostly in the conversations, but I want to give you the information for the other two utilities. The stormwater utility, the increase in the cost allocations was about $405,000. Those are increases from 2019 to 2020.
Can we break that down a little bit? So in the past, whether it had been, I'm not sure what services, certainly IT, but what are the services now being directly charged to these utilities where previously were funded out of the general fund?
Well, there's HR services and other departmental services that provide a benefit to the utilities. And while they may not have been new charges between 19 and 20, they may have been just increases. So they may have been having some level of charge, but the total increases across the board were the numbers that I mentioned. So it's human resources, IT, fleet, other things of that.
Okay, and so those reflect our policy decision that all these various funds and departments actually, from their funding sources, we can account for their demand and the costs for those shared services. That's policy that we have. Vicki?
To clarify, all of the approximately $400,000 increase from 2019 to 2020 in stormwater, that's all due to these internal transfer?
Yes, when I'm talking about cost allocations, it's internal transfers and allocating cost to other departments and services.
Okay, and there's no other change to that?
No, this is the cost allocations.
Lindsay?
So talking to Director Goldberg, we have made this strategic shift toward more cost allocations, but we've done it incrementally, and we're only partially through that. There will be continued changes over the next few budgets. Is that included and considered in the utility rate study?
What's considered in the rate study today is what we know is the difference between 19 and 20, and then there's a cost escalation factor that the rate consultants incorporated in there. What Director Goldberg was mentioning was that there's going to be additional work to refine these cost allocations over the next year or so, and so those will dial in more, but we expect them to be relatively close to what we've estimated it.
Okay, thanks.
So the next driver that I'd like to talk about is the new electronic payment fees, which is a result of allowing credit card payments to be received from customers. And so the water utility, those fees are expected to begin in 2021. The water utility estimated electronic payment fees is $400,000, and I'm talking in round numbers, not exact dollars. The sewer utility is expected to receive about $360,000, and the stormwater utility is expected to receive or have to pay about $198,000.
Hold on just a second, Chris.
So how did you calculate those?
I can't recall the percentage on that, on the total revenues received. I'm going to have to phone a friend here at HDR and find out what that percentage is.
Okay.
Good evening, Sean Korn with HDR Engineering. So the calculation was based on the information received from city staff on how this would be implemented, and it was somewhere between 3% and 4% each year of the total revenues charged. And so this would not only include credit cards, but also debit card and any electronic transmission of funds through banks. So it was essentially on 90 to 95% of all the revenues you'd receive through the utilities at 3 to 4%.
Is that a reasonable benchmark with other utilities, that almost all of the payments are going to come via electronic means?
That's what it's sounding like, yes. It sounded like it's even going to apply to, like, if you do electronic banking and sending it, it's going to count on some of those fees as well. So
That would be
that's the
unique.
basis.
I mean, I've seen credit card fees. I've never seen a direct rolling a bank account have a charge associated with it. So that just surprises me.
It's a pretty fluid marketplace, council members, so I think that's something we need to continue to look at. There are other vendors coming on the scene who have the ability to process those transactions for less. So I think as we are implementing this, we will continue to look at that. So if that's a cost we can bring down, we will.
Yeah, thank you for that. Lindsay?
Yeah, so I appreciate the idea of needing to be flexible. I would also say, is there a way that we can, rather than spreading those costs out across all ratepayers, keep them isolated to people who choose to use methods? Now, obviously, if needs to be flexibility with different payment methods that are going to come online, that isn't the case. But my preference would be if there's a way to design the system that allows for an additional charge when somebody chooses to use a credit card, and not charge them if they're paying in a different method. That seems to make the most sense to me. And I don't know if that impacts the fees then.
I think one of our challenges is just the sheer numbers of folks that will choose to participate. I think, again, if we look at low-income discounts, senior discounts, perhaps we can build that in somehow that way. So maybe it's a credit for not using an electronic payment versus an additional charge if you do. So I think it's a fluid situation. Many communities are facing it. And there are, a lot of new vendors in the marketplace now that are able to do it for less. So we'll continue to monitor that as we implement that. Unless the council makes a specific decision, you want to pass that on, which I don't believe is an industry standard. I think that most communities are, because of backlash, are including those costs in their operations.
And there are occasions and also circumstances where they do add that on. We can just look at the county level or even the federal level where you pay certain fees and taxes.
And I think it's a
property tax,
community
for
standard
example.
issue. So
Right.
I think if the council wishes to revisit this at another evening and pass it all on, then that would be a savings. We could come back with some other options as well.
Yeah, and I think this is the first time for this community, because we are now entering in modern age, and the ability to actually pay this way is new for our city. So I think it's probably worth a policy conversation.
So we'll come back
Lindsay?
another evening to do that,
I was just going to encourage having that conversation at a certain point.
certainly.
Okay, thank you, Sheldon. Continue.
Yeah, thank you. So, as I mentioned, the drivers in and of themselves uniquely aren't the sole driver of the rate increases. I want to mention that increases in cost allocations and the new electronic payment fees, they use up a portion of the debt service capacity, because what they are driven solely by rate revenue, because you can't float debt for it or anything of the sort. So they're using up your rate revenue, which helps support your debt service capacity, which helps fund your capital projects. To give you an idea of what the rate revenues are, about every $100,000 of rate revenue can support approximately about $1 million in debt for capital improvements. That brings me to the last item of the rate drivers, and that is your capital project programming, which includes the water treatment plant and some other large-scale projects that you have. And I have a slide on that. Not immediately following, though. So the aggregate cumulative costs in the water utility, as well as the sewer and the stormwater, on a per capita bi-monthly basis are shown and depicted on this graph. The blue is the water rates, the orange is the sewer rates, which includes the metro charge. And the metro charge in and of itself is a pass-through charge, and it's between 31 and 36% of the total cumulative utility bill that Issaquah sends out. The green is your stormwater rates, and then the purple is, I actually combined all three of the utility taxes together and to show one band, because otherwise it wouldn't have shown up very well at all. So the purple reflects the utility rates, or utility taxes, excuse me, at a rate of 6% in each utility beginning in 2020. In 2019, there's just a little bit because there's about 2.3% utility tax in the water utility today. So this is on the per capita basis. In 2019, the average bill would have been $86 on a per capita basis, and in 2020, it would be expected, if the rates are adopted as shown in the rate study, it would go up to about $94.79 on a per capita basis. And the per capita basis is based upon 2.8 people per household, if that question was to come up.
Can you go back to that one for just a sec, Sheldon? Okay, so I'm looking at the table that you sent that shows the per capita cost for water at $43. And I'm looking at that line, and it A, looks too flat to me, but B, when I look at that, it's also below the $40 a household level, it appears. Yeah.
This is on the per capita basis?
Right.
So I'm looking at, if I look at the water utility by itself on the table, in which year are you looking?
Well, I'm looking at 2024, and then I'm looking at the table that you provided that shows 4319 as the bi-monthly billing estimate for water.
Water rates.
Right.
And then you have the utility taxes at $2.59.
Right. I'm
Yes.
just saying the water rates, the blue one at the bottom, right?
Yes.
Does that, in 2024, does that go beyond $40? It doesn't look, I mean,
It barely does. I mean, the scale of it, you know,
I think it distorts the numbers badly. Because it's a 50% increase from 19 to 24, and that doesn't look like a 50% increase. It's a 53% increase, actually. So, anyway.
okay. I'll have to check the
I guess what I don't like is
Excel
I don't like the
spreadsheet.
graphic and the story it's telling, because I think it's distorting the numbers.
Okay. I'll have to check the Excel spreadsheet and the graph. Thank you. Total bi-monthly utility bill. This is the aggregate for the entire household. In 2019, the household would pay $240.81. In 2020, it would pay $265.40. Similar to the other graphic, each of the three utilities is shown in the blue, the orange or / rust color, and the green, and then the purple at the top is the cumulative utility tax at 6%. And again, the metro charge that's a pass-through on the bi-monthly basis is 31 to 36% of the total bill. Value added with the rates that are in the rate study. There's the credit card payment opportunity provided to the ratepayers. There's quite a bit of system resiliency built into the capital program, both in supply and transmission. Some examples of that are actually some of the larger projects that the city has in their capital improvement program. There's a series of projects that connect the South Cove, Greenwood Point to the rest of the Issaquah City, which actually provides for the use of groundwater in that area if the regional water system goes down. There's also the SPAR reservoir pump station and transmission project that is in the CIP that provides for a separate supply transmission through a different area geographically separated from the current supply source that goes up to Issaquah Highlands and Swedish Hospital, creating resiliency there. And then last is the treatment plant, which by providing a treatment plant, you're providing the opportunity to continue to use your well supply as well as being able to utilize regional supply. Without continuing use of your wells, you basically have one supply line coming into town along Newport Way from basically Eastgate all the way into Issaquah, and that's the 24-inch Cascade water main. Other than that, that's your supply. if you don't continue to have your wells available to you. So that's a supply resiliency factor.
Chris?
So my recollection is we get about 75% plus of our water from Cascade, and that number is escalating over time as the wells are finite and fixed.
The amount of water we're getting from Cascade will escalate because our wells are fixed. That's correct.
And my recollection is that we get about 75% of our water from Cascade.
I'd have to double check that number.
I'm pretty certain of that one.
Okay.
So I guess, you know, when it all comes really down to this, we are investing a ton of money on both distribution infrastructure and water treatment for a small and diminishing portion of our water. And so I just want to understand what the cost is when we really look at the cost of our wells, and we look at it very seriously and say, here's our total cost of water, and here's how much is provided by the wells. Are the wells really any cheaper, total cost of ownership, than Cascade water? And no one has proved that to me yet. And I'm just jumping to the crux of my angst, which is, show me how much it costs for every cup of water coming from a well versus every cup of water coming from Cascade.
Thank you. Tola?
I thought we did see a comparison. There was a chart a while back that showed, I don't know if it was 25 years out, 30 years out, but it showed the various options in front of us and showed why why the administration is recommending pursuing the path that it is, that it was the lowest cost alternative. And I'm wondering if that chart can be shown.
More slides.
Actually, I have more slides that actually goes right to that point. Because what we also heard at the September study session was concern over the high rates, high rate increases. What are our options? We went back to Cascade and had them detail out some options that they thought they could provide for us. And so, Cascade options slide. This is further in research than what was done previously, but two of the options are pretty much the same as a couple of the options that we talked about during the policy conversations, while a third one is a little different. Just some things on this one. All three options would require the Cascade Board to vote for approval with a 65% dual majority vote, weighted and non-weighted votes. The other footnote that Cascade provided us with these three options was that currently Cascade has an estimated 4 million gallons per day, this is average daily demand, not peak, of available water in its supply block. Issaquah, to replace its wells, needs approximately 3. Works well if we're the only member of Cascade that wants to take this opportunity. This opportunity will be offered to other members of Cascade that have independent supply. 3 options. Temporary supply until 2034. That delays treatment plant construction. It also provides for a temporary loss of supply resiliency until the groundwater supply is back online. The option number 2 was replace the well supply with regional water.
Sheldon, excuse me, before you continue.
Yep.
Question?
Temporary loss of supply resiliency, can you talk about that in real people terms, please?
Sure, you bet. Thank you, Stacy. Thank you, Councilmember Goodman. What I mean by the temporary loss of supply resiliency is that Cascade would require us to shut down our wells, not use them. And it speaks to a little bit what I was just talking about prior to this, is that without the well supply being treated, you have a situation where if your single pipeline of supply breaks, you have nothing available. It doesn't mean that you're going to have everything you need available, but what it means is at least you'll have something to provide people with. That's what I mean by resiliency. Option number 2 that Cascade
Before you
provided.
continue,
Yep.
I'm sorry, I think Lindsay, then Vicki.
So is option number 1, this is a new option that hasn't come to council or the public previously? Option 2 and 3 are very similar to other things that we've discussed, right?
You are correct.
Okay.
Vicki?
Why 2034? What's that number from?
That was Cascade's limitation, because
is
that's
it-
based on regional forecasts that they believe that they're going to start to need their block by 2034.
Okay, so I just wanted to clarify that, because I think it's not that we would need to make a decision through 2034. We could have an agreement to do a shorter period of time with this block of water.
Yes, we could.
So that's the 2034 date is is the maximum. It's based on estimates that Cascade Water has now. They would enter into an agreement potentially that far, but no further. But yes, the Issaquah could have an agreement that's less time.
And this assumes, this means just like 3, everybody in the city would be getting regional water? There'd be no well water delivered under option 1?
That is correct.
All right. Vicki?
So one other option that we discussed, but that I don't see here now, is also converting the Talus water, which is currently well water, right? But has the infrastructure to be on regional water, converting that to regional water first. And that would, my recollection is, provide a few more years that we wouldn't have to go to blending water based on our current population and demand projections.
Correct. That was discussed during the presentations last year, and actually that's in the strategies so that we don't need to have the treatment online until about the mid-2020s, which is your 24 to 26 timeframe. Thank you. So the second option that Cascade provided us was to replace the well supply with regional water. In this option, we would have to deed all the wells to Cascade, which provides them with complete control over the wells, and that provides a loss of supply resiliency. With Cascade controlling those wells, we don't know when they would put them back online for potable use. We also don't know whether they would even want to use them for potable use. They may decide that they want to use that for fisheries enhancements or something else. So you have a potential loss of supply resiliency in the complete sense of it there, because you've lost control. In option number
Hold on, please, Chris.
Do we have supply resiliency today?
through most of the city, yes.
Okay.
And can we just complete, because we have 2 sources?
Because we have
our
2 supply
wells and
sources.
regional.
But how can we, because we don't mix the supply sources, I mean, that's in some foot. I mean, we have to have discrete delivery systems.
We don't have discrete delivery systems, but if one supply system goes down, you can bring the other one in to the system. And we do treat just at separate areas individually in our wells. We don't centralize treat. It's very inefficient the way we do our treatment today. So we do have supply resiliency.
Vicki?
I think it is a bit confusing, because I think we did also have a conversation, though, about how the infrastructure was set up such that it is impossible or extremely expensive, extremely difficult, and not really feasible to just convert large neighborhoods or large sections of our city to regional water. You can't just switch from one to the other the way our infrastructure is set up, right? So it's not completely like you can just switch on and off.
With the exception of Talus and Highlands, you're correct. We can still introduce it because we're treating, operationally, it's very inefficient the way we're treating our wells today. So we could introduce the regional water, but we've got to do some other adjustments to our wells before we can blend them. Specifically, there was a fluoridation issue there, as well as we've got a myriad of other naturally occurring elements within our water in the different wells that we have to address, and then we have to address the PFAS. And so to centralize that is the more efficient, effective way of doing it. But today, it's the valley floor, Squawk Mountain. Those are the areas that you can't just carve off a piece and have it be efficient because you've got additional infrastructure to be able to provide the level of service like storage for fires, things of that nature. And that was actually, going back earlier in my slides, as I spoke to it, was during the policy conversations. That was the last item I talked about it, on slide 3. It was reduce groundwater only, in certain areas to delay the treatment, and that was causing the need for other infrastructure to be built so that we could do that. So lastly, replacing the well supply with regional water where the city keeps its wells. This option, we also have to pay the regional connection facilities charges for the supply loss. Cascade would require that we do not use the wells. And if we want to use the wells, we have to get that permission. And then, of course, it comes again with the loss of supply resiliency because we don't have permission to use the wells. Getting to Councilmember Ray's question earlier about the cost analysis. We had the rate consultants analyze the information that Cascade gave us for how they would give us the discounts on the water we purchase, over what time, how it ramps up, how it ramps down, the connection charges. All of this comes into play. And so had HDR do the analysis of all 3 options, compare them to, and then I took their numbers and the 2019 rate study and put it together as a comparison on the 20-year cumulative rates of the options. The blue line represents the current rate study that's in front of you. Option number 1 is the red line, option 2 is the green, and then option 3 is the purple. Option 3 is the more expensive one because we have to pay the regional connection charges as a result of the supply loss. Options 1 and 2 remain fairly close to the 2019 rate study until about 10, 12 years out, where they escalate and stay higher than the 2019 rate study. The option 1 appears to come in pretty close at the end of the 20-year period in 2040, but it's just barely above the 2019 rate study. Given that it's that far out, you could call those equivalent at the end of the day. But it's in the middle time frame for what happens to your rates. So these are the cumulative rate increases that would be for the different options. So tonight, the administration's looking for direction for the water, sewer, and stormwater utility rates, as well as the connection charges for the consideration at a regular council meeting. Recommendation is that the council consider the proposed rates and connection charges as shown in the 2019 rate study and the connection charge studies prepared by HDR.
Zola.
Can you go back to the chart okay, so what are the percentages on the left?
On the left, the percentages go from basically about the 5% mark all the way on the left-hand column to 200%.
No, I can read that. I'm asking what's the quantity that it's expressing? What is it measuring?
It's measuring the cumulative rate increases over time.
So this is the rate increases for any user of any quantity of water?
This is the rate revenue increase that the utility needs to get to support its operations and capital program over the 20-year period.
The rate
estimate of it.
So this is revenues?
This is revenues.
Okay.
These are rate revenue increases that the utility needs to have based on this estimate.
I don't like the word rate, because one of the factors we have here is the extent to which we want to run different rates for different levels of consumption, right? This is revenue. This is
Yes, this is
revenue
gross
that we
rate
need.
revenue.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
So does this include the costs of capital expenses?
Yes, and debt issuances to support capital, as well as the other types of operating expenditures that the utility has. Yes.
So an option one is punt until 2034. Option two is, tell me again?
Option 2 was replace the well supply with regional water and deed the wells to Cascade.
The thing I'm struggling with was, when did we have the big, we had 3 water meetings in a row here that were
Yes.
like 3 hours each, right?
Yes.
When did that occur?
That occurred in, actually, there was 4, June, July, September, and December 2018.
So I thought that somewhere along the way, you showed a chart that sort of made a compelling case for one of the options of the, can you go back to the chart again? I thought at some point you showed a chart that showed a compelling reason to choose one of the options over the other. This does not show a compelling, it shows 2 options that at the end of the day are essentially the same, right?
It wasn't a chart, what it was a table in HDR's presentation, and I didn't bring the table in this presentation, but those were the net present values of the different options, and 2 of the options were close. There was a $38.9 million option, which was the direction that was chosen, to blend groundwater with regional water to the maximum extent feasible. And then the other option was to reduce groundwater to certain areas only, in other words, convert little by little over time, and that one was about a $44 million option. And the next one, transferring wells to Cascade, the net present value is $58.6 million, and the other one was take all regional water but retain the wells, and that was about $76 million. So it does somewhat line up with these curves as well, because if you look at transfer wells to Cascade at 58.6 net present value, that's probably option 2, where we transfer the wells to Cascade and don't have to pay the RCFCs. The only difference is that instead of carving off little by little the system, Cascade provided us another option, which was option number 1. That's a new option
Okay.
that we
So
were unaware of at the time.
I understood what was presented in 2018, and I understood the direction that the administration wanted to go. I don't understand this chart, and I don't understand what I'm supposed to do as a policymaker with the information that's on this chart and how to make a decision this evening. Maybe other people do. If other people do, help me.
Okay, we will see if we can phone some friends. Oh, you don't have it on anymore. Stacy?
Yeah, similar line of questioning. It's about sorry for my frog in my throat today. We're in the middle of the budget, and it seems as though before we make a decision about rates and taxes on utilities, that we have to know what the plans are for a plant. Yes, no, am I wrong? That seems to be the threshold question.
Yes.
And so now we are in the middle of budget. We are less than 24 hours from starting our official deliberations, and we have a brand-new option. I, for one, don't see how it's possible for us to make a decision about the water treatment plant when we are hearing it for the first time, and the public is hearing it for the first time. This is just going to trickle out into the public. We're not going to have any feedback. And so what options do we have for not deciding on a treatment plant until after budget, maybe not this year, and then backing out potentially increases in any of the revenues that have to do with the treatment plant until we know what we're going to do.
Yes, I believe that is absolutely the question before you. In my review of this, working with staff, working with the mayor, I agree with you 100%. And we wanted to make this presentation this evening to, as it was promised, to give you a broad overview of where the rate study was. But there are a couple different factors at play. Certainly the budget, the issue of an unresolved way forward, and Cascade Water. They have been following all this very carefully. Our representatives on their board have been sharing the information that had been presented to the council, and staff from Cascade Water has come to us over the last, 8 weeks or so, and have said, perhaps there are other options. And so those other options have we begun to explore, but we have not been able to fully vet those other options. So the costs of Cascade Water for whatever period, I think we've talked about an outside period, but certainly for shorter terms, they have some water that's immediately available that they may be able to make available to us at one rate, and then further beyond that at a different rate. That information is not clear yet from Cascade Water. So there are a lot of things up in the air, and then you throw the budget in. So it would be my recommendation, the administration's recommendation, that a way forward here may be to not adjust the rates beyond the 3.5% that was previously agreed to by the council back when?
2015.
In 2015. Allow the council then to consider these other matters. I think really the Cascade Water issue needs to be fleshed out more, and I don't anticipate that we'll be able to do that prior to the end of the budget. They need to go back to their member agencies. I think we've understand anecdotally that there are other member agencies that may be interested in the water allocation that's currently available, so that may change what's available. We don't know if Cascade will have some sort of process to evaluate between the various member agencies who are interested in the water. My sense is we need to put this all off till next year, and that by raising water rates, the 3.5% that's been previously agreed to makes sense. We'll continue to put money away toward other infrastructure needs. We will continue to operate a water utility distribution, certainly, into the foreseeable future. And then that allows the council then to look at the utility tax issue based on a smaller rate increase, and that may provide the council some flexibility in its consideration of potential increases to the utility tax. And once the council makes those decisions, that I believe then makes the budget discussions much clearer. And so it's my hope, Councilmember Winterstein, members of the council, that either you continue to have that discussion this evening, or at some appropriate point we conclude this evening and perhaps start tomorrow with that, because I think if the council can understand where it stands on revenue, so that's the utility rates and the utility taxes, there are other revenue issues, parks and rec fees, other things that are also out there. My recommendation would be is if you can, as a group, decide where you are on revenue, come to those agreements, that will then make the expenditure side a little bit more easy. You've spent a lot of time deliberating. You have multiple additional days. It would be my hope that you wouldn't even need those additional days, that if you can make good progress tomorrow on the revenue side, next Monday, then hopefully on the expenditure side, at the conclusion of your meeting on the 28th, it would be my hope that you'd be very close to a budget decision that you all are comfortable with, and then those actions could be taken in the following weeks as we've already outlined.
Okay, thank you. There was a lot in there. You just said quite a bit. And one of the things you said is maybe we can take this water treatment off the table for budgetary considerations for 2020 and pick that conversation up later. So part of me likes that. But at the same time, I'm a little bit in Tola's boat as well. I think there's a really good chance now I'm going to end my career on the council, and there's going to be one topic that I don't really understand. And it'll be my colleagues who are left to actually get an understanding of it afterwards. So, Wally, the last point that you made was? Yeah, maybe. It's, because you brought it up, budget is never so clean, decide revenue, then decide expenses. I mean, I think we have a history of kind of looking at it holistically, and I'm expecting we're going to kind of look at that imbalance starting tomorrow as well. Lindsay?
So I appreciate the opportunity to push off that conversation and really get a sense of what our options are and the costs for Cascade, water, and such. My concern as a steward of our utility and our infrastructure is, does the 3.5% increase, does that leave us in a safe financial place for the utilities?
We have looked
Yeah.
at that.
We've looked at that, as Wally just mentioned. I had conversations even this morning with the rate consultants on that very topic. And what we would be able to do is, from the treatment plant perspective, we would delay the purchase of property, which was like $4.7 million of debt issuance next year, estimated. We don't know the exact price of land because we don't know which land it is yet. So that would get delayed to sometime 21, 22, depending upon what options the council wants to move forward with on this, and further options in reviewing what Cascade's doing. The other thing is we would have to use some of the fund balance to support the SPAR water main and water main and pump station project, but that's all doable, as the rates would have to be reanalyzed and so forth based upon more certainty from Cascade and the options that the council wants, and we could figure out how to do rate leveling and things like that over the next 5 to 10 years to hopefully keep the rates down as a result. But we're good for 2020.
So we have a healthy enough fund balance
We have enough
that we
fund
can-
balance that we can continue to move along with some design work on the treatment plant, delay the property purchase. And the only reason why I say the design work on the treatment plant is just in case the council continues down this, we haven't lost time. Because if the council wants that treatment plant, the forecast is by 2024, we should have it online. So it takes time to get that done. But the large expenditures can be supported by delaying the large property purchase for the treatment
Yeah.
plant. And then the other is we would be using fund balance for capital instead of issuing a large debt.
Thank you. Vicki?
I am wondering on this chart, the option for option 2, it looks like it's similar until 2036 or so, and then it starts being different than the rate study in option 1. But option 2 doesn't include a water treatment plant, right? So I'm confused why we don't see that.
More savings.
Because in option
Lower
2,
revenue requirement? You expect lower?
Yeah.
Your question is?
Yeah.
so in option 2, what you're seeing is the ramping up of having to pay Cascade to the full price for the water supply. Up until the Cascade gave us the options of ramping into the water supply cost at roughly 10% of what they charge for a demand share at the beginning. But it ramps up over a 4 or 5 year period to about 50 or 60%, depending upon which option it is. And then it stays at that 50 or 60% until approximately 2034. And then it starts to ramp back up to the 100% mark. So what you're seeing is you're seeing Cascade saying, well, we need our water now, so we expect you to pay full price. And so that's why, all the options start to escalate past 2034, because Cascade is now ramping back up the cost of their water.
Right, and that's at the tail end of this, but my question is more, so do I take away from this correctly that building a water treatment plant, that building of the water treatment plant somehow equals out to, or for the next decade, that somehow equals out to the same rate you would get if you didn't build a water treatment plant, but you bought water from Cascade.
Yes. Right about the 2032 timeframe, option one crosses over the 2019 rate study on a cumulative gross revenue rate increase.
Good.
Okay.
Ola?
So, Paul, I have a number of fairly urgent questions regarding comments City Administrator Bobkowitz has made with regard to tomorrow's agenda, but they don't directly relate to the city water plan. So I can either make those comments now, or I'd rather ask your permission to have a for good of the order at the end of tonight's meeting once we're done with this conversation.
Okay, I'll certainly take that under consideration. Let's, for the moment, keep things on water supply. Do you have anything related to?
Can I have a for good of the order at the end of the meeting? Or we can just show up tomorrow and see what happens.
Oh, okay. I mean, so you think this is essential, I mean, that we all are part of this
Yep.
conversation?
Correct. But I want to have it after this conversation, but I want to have it before we adjourn this evening. So I'm asking permission to have a for good of the order this evening.
You're so formal. That's so nice.
It's your meeting.
Yeah, I'm interested in what your questions are, so unless I see any strong dissent among colleagues, so everybody's in agreement, nobody disagreed, you're only going to have a few minutes when we get there.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions or comments or input regarding the water plan? So I do, and again, I'm seeking clarification, and I think Vicki asked a point that the original study and the options that you did, you said a net present value. It's kind of like a net cost, a net current cost for the three options. And in current dollars. And one was a treatment plan and two were out? Or they did not all have a treatment plan, is that correct? Because option one that you have up here, the 2019 rate study, is the one with the treatment plant, but there was other options like somewhat similar to options 2 and 3 we were given today. Matter of fact, they sound really the same.
Two of the options had treatment plant. And then the option that had two subparts to it, which was use all regional water, did not have treatment plant.
Okay, all right. And then, so the two options, options 2 and 3 we were given today also are use all regional water.
Correct.
Right. And whatever chemical composition it comes in.
Correct.
And that includes fluoride.
Yes.
Okay. So that's another kind of policy consideration for these options. Okay. So I think what we need, okay, sorry, Lindsay, thank you.
So I think the point that you were getting at, or, kind of some of the thing that we're cycling around is this idea of, hey, we were presented with options previously, and the numbers with that net cost, whatever, made it very clear that blending the groundwater with the regional water was the most cost-effective for us and our ratepayers. What we're seeing here is option 1, 2, and 3 that seem to be fairly similar in cost. And so the question that I want to ask is what we're seeing here with those similar costs because Cascade has presented us with an option of not paying the full cost of the water, the discount? I see nodding heads. Like, maybe I've hit on something.
Don't steal the thunder, guys.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so then the conversation that we're having could be moot if we can't get that discounted Cascade water. We would go basically back to our previous options, which were blend regional water and retain the wells, regional water and transfer the wells, or reduce the groundwater only, correct?
Yes. Yes.
But because this is a moving target, because of additional information we're receiving from Cascade, it's our recommendation, given this is a long-term, high-dollar project, is to run the course with Cascade and get more specific information. It's our judgment that to have you stop your budget process and let us try to get this information is not very practical. And so as we're now, as the council's preparing to move into deliberations, we're trying to offer practical advice to the council to allow you to move forward with all the matters before you.
Yes, I just had to wrap my head around the first concept.
Vicki?
As the Cascade Water Alliance board member, I wanted to clarify, though, that I think this is using more of that water at a rate that is discounted. I think it's a very real possibility, and I think it's something that has been discussed since my very first meeting on Cascade, and they have this extra water because they have this bulk quantity of water that they expect to exceed the amount of demand, but it's consistently exceeded the amount of demand by so much that they now are, very confident that this water is not going to be used and people are conserving more water. So I think I just wanted to make it clear that this is water that they have that is not being used and hasn't been historically used, and the trends are not suggesting differently right now.
All right, thank you. Stacy?
So I was just looking at what would be the next logical step, and if we continue to drill down questions, I don't know that that's the best use of our time if we as a council, with head nods, decide that tonight, not a decision, with some sort of acknowledgement that that's likely the direction we're going to go, then it seems like we should send that message to the city administrator and then figure out where we start tomorrow night. Because if we're going to consider this more seriously next year, as is recommended, then we're going to get all of this plus a whole lot more. And so we can continue just asking questions, which we're going to probably, I'm guessing, we're probably going to have to start all over again the first of the year. Do this again.
Mariah?
First of all, I agree with what Stacy just talked about, but I have another question that might not be able to be answered, but because Cascade had recently come forward with this new additional information, is it possible that there might even be yet another option that could fall into a category where we wouldn't completely lose the ability to lose the wells, for example, or just another option? Because it seems like some of these options came forward sort of at the last minute, so I'm just wondering if the conversation is still, ever moving.
I think the answer is it has been ever moving, and practically speaking, it has to stop. The conversation has to come to some conclusions, because we all need to make a decision. The amount of water that's available for the pricing that is being offered is not a forever thing. And so I think one of the things you've heard tonight in looking at these graphs is what happens beyond the years that we're currently discussing. We have not gotten from Cascade a firm process as to how they will make this determination. They have certainly indicated that they're going to offer this to other jurisdictions. I can say that I have spoken to one other area water agency that has expressed an interest in also trying to take advantage of this water. And so then the question is, if there are more takers than the water is available, what happens? And I don't know that Cascade has an answer to that. But again, because of the magnitude of this project, because of the dollars we're talking about, it would be my recommendation, administration's recommendation, to go down that path. And that will take us past the timing of the budget process. So if the council is comfortable with a scenario that leaves the rate increase at 3.5%, Sheldon reminds me there's also some connection charge adjustments, which are hopefully non-controversial. Those would be part of the budget. We move forward and then come back as soon as we can. If there's an opportunity, there's a study session in December. If we have more information from Cascade, either a firm process or a firm, if we're able to negotiate some sort of contract that we could then come back and firm up these numbers a little bit, we'd be happy to do that. But I don't believe we will be able to do that by the budget timeframe.
I agree, we should move forward and try to get an idea of how everyone is feeling. So we can move forward, but I do think it's just unfortunate to go into budget with this sort of ever-looming non-answered question.
Right, and I think the question, it would be good for people to comment on, because we're not going to take a formal vote tonight, but there is, if you go a couple slides forward, Sheldon, you do you do say what direction, and you make a recommendation, but I think there's a new recommendation alternative that's on the floor for us to consider, and I'd like people to comment on. And I would think, if I can summarize this, and that simply is, we can put off this, no, that's not it. It is to not, this recommendation in this time frame right now was to put off the decision and until such time we continue to stay with the existing plan, including rates, until we make a final decision. So we can put that off. So, and then that allows us to continue with our actual, we would continue our budget deliberation process with that as the baseline. Think that, okay, so who has additional comments? Who'd like to comment for the administration's benefit? Chris?
So I think the point that Stacy made earlier about we're in the middle of the budget and we're still wrestling this is very germane. And quite honestly, I just went back and I looked at the December study session, and we did get the net present value of the different alternatives, and they were there. I can only speak for myself. I had never have contemplated that the impact on the rates would be as dramatic as it was. And maybe that's just me being naive, but I had no idea that they would be this dramatic. And I think before we embark on a course of action that's going to result in that kind of increase in the cost of water for our community, I want to make sure that we've explored all the options. So my preference is, since I don't think we're underwater yet, that we take advantage of the time and give this a little more studying, given the new data that we have, both in terms of what the rates are and in terms of what Cascade Water is willing to do for us.
Thank you, Chris. Vicki?
I agree with the basic premise that I think keeping the rates the way they are and then postponing the water treatment plant discussion. When I first saw the water treatment plant in the 2020 project cost, as a 2020 project cost in the CIP, I was surprised given where we are in the conversation and where we are with community engagement on this topic. It seems that spending $5.4 million on it in the 2020 timeframe didn't seem aligned with where we are process-wise. So I generally agree with all of that. I also think, I think it's great that we're having serious conversations with Cascade about this water. And I think it can be, my understanding is it can be an ongoing discussion, but I'm glad that we're taking serious steps to understand what that is an option, especially given that the options that increase the amount of Cascade water and don't build a water treatment plant, they are looking very similar in terms of rates, so we should, I think, give them equal consideration.
Does anybody have any comments in opposing the plan on the floor? Okay.
So,
do you have clarity on the council's intent?
I think, again, there's two pieces. So what we will do on the operational side is we will continue to talk with Cascade. We will come back to the council at the earliest appropriate time to update you on those discussions. We will make sure that as we are incorporating whatever information we get from them, that I think one of the challenges I've heard from the council this evening is sort of an apples to apples comparison, that you've gotten information that has sliced and diced this in a couple different ways. So you have my commitment that we will, next time we come to see you, we will agree on certain ways to slice and dice and keep it to those certain ways, so that as you evaluate new scenarios, that we make that as easy for you as possible. I think that this needs to be front and center with the council. If we're going to do a treatment plant, I think we do need to revisit the community outreach piece to make sure you're all comfortable. The location issues, there's still fluoride out there. There's many pieces that I think we would need to double back with, but I would recommend that we would only come back to you once we have significantly more specific information from Cascade. So I think, Councilmember Winterstein, that's clear. As far as rates for 2020 and the impact of the budget, I don't want to presuppose where the council is. So we will be prepared to pick up the conversation at whatever juncture you direct, but appreciate the conversation you've had this evening.
Okay, and my assumption in that, because this proposal in front of us would replace an existing rate plan. You talked about it already. So my assumption is that remains in effect until we do something different. And I think this course of action is we're delaying a decision on doing something different. So the existing plan stays in place.
That is how I interpret it.
Okay.
Again,
Right.
with
Okay.
the caveat that the council needs to have the broader discussion.
Of course. Okay. So I think that concludes, no, Sheldon, you're shaking your head.
Apologize.
You have some comments. Go ahead,
I
Sheldon.
believe we still need clarity on the second part of it, which is the general facilities charge increases that the general facilities charge rate study recommended. It was in the memorandum that was in your packet. And that's the second component, because that would take an ordinance by council to adopt new connection charges. In the packet, in the memo from staff, in the water utility, the connection charge paid for by developers would increase from $6,029 to $8,673. That is only the city's portion. That does not include the regional connection charge. In the sewer utility, in 2019, it's $2,024. It would increase to $2,124. And stormwater in 2019 was $1,256, and that would increase in 2020 to $1,457. These are fees that developers pay at the time in which they receive their building permits for new development, that buy into the existing system, as well as for expansion of the system to accommodate their growth. So if direction's needed on that component as well, I think we're clear on the rate component, but this is a connection charge component that's just as important to the utilities.
Okay, I missed that because you don't really have information about it in your slide deck.
That's correct, I'm sorry.
Lindsay?
So how much of that increase is related to some of these capital expenditures, such as the water treatment plant, and how much is related to the other costs?
The water treatment plant, I believe, is on the order of $1,000 or so on the increase from the 6,000 to the 8,000.
So could we potentially back that out if we are not at this point making that decision?
We could change that if you'd like. I can get that information from the rate consultants and then just back it out.
If I like, I think that's the fair,
It's consistent with the other direction.
yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
we can back that out.
Go ahead, Vicki.
Clarification on the water treatment plant Does that affect the sewer and stormwater rate estimates?
No,
That's what, okay, thank you.
only the water.
And so this requires its own ordinance, and I would ask the council right now if anybody wants to comment on the exchange that just was had, where I appreciate Lindsay recognizing that the connection charges did reflect a capital plan that we're going to defer a decision on right now. And so I think we're saying, prepare an ordinance for a connection, to deal with connection charges that does back out the portion that was for a plant. So is everybody, I see a thumbs up. So there's general agreement with that instruction for you to prepare that, which we will deliberate and vote on, take action on at a future time. I wish we could handle all topics that quickly. Is there anything, so Sheldon, is there anything else?
No, that was it. Thank you.
Okay, okay, Stacy?
I'm not sure if this is part of Tola's questions or not, but, and I haven't heard this specific question, so I'm not sure of the answer, which is why I'm asking the question. So is keeping the water rate status quo without any increases beyond what we've already approved, and then not making a decision on the water treatment plant until later, is that a neutral decision in the budget? So are we going to see any, do you know what I'm saying?
Other changes?
So in other words, if all of the water rate increases are feeding the treatment plant, the revenue is feeding the treatment plant, then it's a neutral decision. But I'm not sure of the answer to that.
Unfortunately, it's not. So the utility tax issue then comes into play. So the utility tax in the mayor's proposed budget is at 6%, and that 6% was applied to the higher rate that was proposed. So we will be prepared to talk about, and I think the mayor's memo that she distributed yesterday deals with this in general terms, but there is a loss of revenue to the general fund, even if the 6% is still applied, because then the rate is less. And I think those numbers were, I don't have the memo in front of me, but I think we're generally prepared. So that's, and I don't want to, that's for tomorrow night's discussions, exactly.
All right, thank you, Stacy. So before we wrap up and go to what Tola called good of the order, Sheldon, I just want to share my own insight of what's really happened over the last couple of years. And in a way, I saw this coming in that, but it was the timing of the fact that it's happening like right here at budget time, and the magnitude of other things that we're considering, I think, is amplifying a little bit. But it was a very, very sequential process about first deciding and deliberating whether, okay, let's do a water system plan update. And we got a lot of education through that process. But then we looked at a year plus ago about the options, which included the treatment plant. And that was those were very discrete steps. And then, okay, now that we've gotten direction from you, we're going to do this rate study. And it was like, I think there was a comment already this evening, it's like, or something about, or maybe you even made it, or maybe it was the previous one, maybe Jean said it about, it's kind of like the headline's been buried the whole time until the very end here about what the cost impact would be. And I think just as a process involving us and the length of times and the complexity of this, my only feedback is that I knew when we looked at the water system plan, you might remember you and I had a public exchange. I said, let's try to do a back of the napkin on what this might be. And we thought, oh, this is 50% increase easy. But it's just, I think the complexity, the time, and the fact that this really sets for the council so late in the process at a budget time, a budget like this, I think that's added a lot to the difficulty. So I just want for your consideration. Okay, so that concludes our published agenda for this evening, but we're going to give Tola the floor because the council is just going to take a 20-hour pause and come back tomorrow to pick up budget deliberations. And Tola, go ahead.
So I just want to make sure that the 7 of us plus City Administrator Bob Quitz are all on the same page about how tomorrow's going to work. So last Monday night, we had a fairly disjointed conversation about how we were going to move forward with deliberations. And it was somewhat disjointed because this is a different kind of year, right? In previous years, we took a budget and we just nibbled at it here and added little things over there and got it to balance and called it a day. So, but there are a number of stated potential significant changes that would fundamentally change the character of the budget. So what was discussed at last Wednesday's leadership was the idea that this meeting upcoming would really be about identifying 2 or 3 flavors, if you will, of budget, and then discussing those in toto. In other words, let's say there's the budget as presented. Let's say there's a no new revenue option. Let's say there's something that's halfway in between, just to pick 3 things, right? That if we identified those 3 tomorrow night, that we sort of then start talking about what would that mean, rather than saying, here's a revenue bogey, and then we as a council, historically, we as a council tried to get it all to balance out, right? And that the magnitude of the numbers involved may or may not lend themselves to the council attempting to do that, as opposed to working with the administration to see if we wanted, halfway between a no new revenue and the proposed budget, what might that look like? And have that be a holistic conversation about what that option looks like compared to the option that the mayor gave to us. So my concern is around, City Administrator Bob Quitz, your statement that tomorrow would be about addressing revenues. And I think that what we came across at leadership was really wanting to get a sense from the council what flavors of budget we want to look at, and that the mayor's memo from yesterday is an attempt to start to provide the context for that conversation. That I don't know how much of that we'll be able to get to tomorrow, because we certainly wouldn't be able if we said, somebody said, I want this much utility tax and this much, and somebody says, I want B&O or whatever. I'm not sure that tomorrow we'd be able to get to a point where we'd say, okay, and this is what it means, and here's how you have a no cuts budget or whatever. But I want to start with getting a sense from the body about which flavors of budget you want to look at. Do we want to look at a no new revenue? Do all 7 of us want to take the current budget as presented by the mayor and just make minor modifications? I suspect that one, the answer to that one is no. But that's what I believe. I believe that's where we start tomorrow, and that's what we discussed at leadership last week. So I just want to make sure, A, that my fellow council members understand how we're going to go into it tomorrow. And I want to make sure, City Administrator, that that's how you see it too, because there isn't really just a revenue conversation. It's identifying the fundamental, do we want, at the risk of trivializing something that's important, do we want chocolate, or do we want spumoni, or do we want vanilla, or do we want butterbrickle, right? And identifying the flavors that we want to evaluate as a council. Stacy, you look quizzical. Okay. City Administrator, is anything that I just said not your understanding of how we were going to do things tomorrow?
Well, I think the mayor's memo got us to the ice cream store. And so I think that there's information contained in there that's it's one step further than perhaps what I just heard you describe. Obviously, it's your deliberations. I am sensitive to the number of hours you have already spent on the budget, the amount of information we have provided and answers to questions. You have 3 evenings scheduled. I think the mayor's memo was an attempt to react to the conversation at leadership last week to talk about the flavors. And I think that the tables that are included in the memo reflect that. If you're able to make some decisions based on that, and again, I think the discussion the council just had on the utility rate, then that you look at the utility tax, that helps you focus on the flavor that I think that you're looking at. I just would like to be as respectful as possible to what might be 12 additional hours, 10 to 12 additional hours of deliberation on top of, I haven't counted them, but probably 8 to 10 hours that you've already had. And this has been an extraordinary time. My understanding, the staff, senior staff talked about this today. This is more hours to this point than some councils have spent in a long time on an Issaquah budget, certainly my experience. And well,
Sorry, we normally go into December, you know.
Okay, well, again, my job is to try to be helpful, and so I think, and Mayor Polly very much wants to be helpful too, and I think the memo was in that spirit. With all that said, your staff stands ready to provide you whatever information in whatever format that you like. We would really love for you to be able to adopt this in November before the change in the council. And so we feel confident that we can support that through the next 3 meetings, and we'll do everything in our power to help you make that happen.
I don't think we know what flavors the 7 of us want to look at until the 7 of us talk to each other, because somebody might be like, well, maybe I like the mayor's budget, and then I hear from Chris and find Chris compelling, or hear from Paul and find Paul compelling, and then I don't want to look at that option. But
So we know what thank you for, we have a better idea. All I would say, Wally, is that been there, done that, hour-wise. Stacy?
Since I'm lactose intolerant, I'm not super excited about going to the ice cream store. I'll just say that. But, so I'm having trouble wrapping my head around getting a sense of the flavor. Because I do see, I talked about, threshold questions, and I see the next round of threshold questions have to do with revenue, and the revenue, the decisions about revenue that we make drive all the other decisions that we make, because that tells us how much money we're going to have to play with, and determine what cuts or adjustments we're going to need to make. So I'm a little bit, I apologize, I just don't quite understand what you mean by the flavor of it.
sure, I can't, like, to give you an example, I can't consider a no new revenue option without understanding what that would mean to staff, right? So, and I don't feel ready myself to try to come up with, let's say, $4 million worth of cuts myself, like cut this, cut this, cut this. I don't want to operate that at the line item, right? So I'd like to see if there's a general consensus that we want to look at a no new, that there's enough folks who want to look at a no new revenue option. There's enough folks that want to look at something in the middle. There's folks who want to look at the mayor's budget as presented and say, okay, these are the 3 fundamental directions that we want to consider. These are the 3 paths in front of us that we are considering treading, and then get a sense of what that means.
So and are you talking about revenue then? You're talking about mostly revenue?
But it's also
rates.
what the impacts would be. Again,
Yeah. Okay, so my concern is that you were talking about flavor. It's like, okay, well, I envision this kind of a budget, and so we just sit around and have a philosophical conversation about a budget. That's what concerns me, because I think we have to make some progress.
No, I hope tomorrow to identify literally 2 or 3 paths, describe those paths well, get a sense that those 2 or 3 paths represent the options that the 7 of us want to consider, and let the administration respond to that. And if we can make lots of progress tomorrow, great. If all we do is identify what those 2 or 3 are, and City Administrator Bobkowitz goes, wow, I need to sit down with staff and figure out this isn't something we can do, we can't do any more with it tonight, but we'll continue this at the next meeting. I think it would be valuable to get us down to just 2 or 3 fundamental budgetary directions. That's my goal for tomorrow. Councilmember, sorry, your meeting.
I would just add to that conversation, I don't want to get into our deliberations, but if I would add a little bit more concrete and just not be philosophical, it's like, I think we should have a conversation on the table about, okay, can we use some of our cash on hand, also known as ending fund balance, as part of the balancing of this budget? So we should have that kind of conversation, because that'll directly affect structurally what any other further development of a new option that either administration puts forward or we develop ourselves. But we should have that. That's the kind of conversation, that would be one question I think we should have.
Yeah, I would like to see us build some packets, if you will, sets of assumptions. So the assumptions or the parameters in this one might be, we're going to use ending fund balance. This one, we're going to have no new taxes. But I don't think we have enough, quite honestly, I love the budget document, but I don't think there's enough information for us, nor is I think appropriate for us to go through and tease through all of this line by line. So I'd like us to set some little more macro level parameters, and then allow the administration to come back and say, okay, if we said no new taxes, what would that look like? And
Okay, I think we're going to end our conversation on that note. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, staff, Wally, for Sheldon for being last, and for your crew that's left. We are adjourned. And